Hello there, and welcome to Planet in Question, where curiosity gets cozy and wonder learns to slow down. Tonight, we're not diving into oceans or wandering through the deep past of continents. Instead, we're looking upward toward the quiet canopy that has always been there above us, the night sky. Those endless points of light have watched everything we've ever done. Every fire we lit, every story we told, every city we built, and every civilization that fell. They were all carried out under the same slow turning of the stars. It's humbling, isn't it, to realize that as far back as memory stretches, the stars have been watching, steady and patient. And maybe, just maybe, they've been doing more than watching. Maybe they've been guiding, whispering, inspiring in ways we've forgotten. Before we begin to wander through that thought, take a quiet moment to notice where you are right now. Are you lying down somewhere soft? A blanket drawn close, lights dimmed, the hum of the world fading into stillness? Maybe it's daytime, sunlight sneaking through a curtain, and this story is just a small pocket of calm in your day. Wherever you are, this moment is shared, me speaking, you listening, and the same earth turning beneath both of us. The stars are out somewhere above you, even if you can't see them right now. The same constellations that our ancestors once traced with their fingertips. The same lights that ancient astronomers named, mapped, and prayed to. If you find this kind of slow wandering to be good company, I'd be grateful if you gave this a like, maybe even subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm find others who might also need a quiet place to drift and think. Let's start slowly, as we always do. Take a breath. Imagine a night with no cities, no engines, no electric glow, just the sound of insects, the flicker of firelight, and a sky so dark and clear that you could see the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. For most of human history, this was the normal sky. It wasn't rare or special, it was home. People would have known the stars the way we know our neighborhoods. They had names for them, stories, relationships. The stars weren't distant, they were companions, teachers, sometimes even gods. When we think of ancient civilizations, we picture temples and pyramids and stone monuments. But before there were walls of stone, there were skies full of meaning. And it was from that sky, perhaps, that the first blueprints of civilization descended. There's something almost magnetic about the night sky. Even now, when we're surrounded by distractions, it can still pull us in. But imagine being one of the first people to truly see it, to lie on your back in some grassy clearing 50,000 years ago, far from any fire, and look up into an ocean of light. Thousands of stars, faint clouds of nebulae, wandering planets tracing slow paths across the heavens. You might not have had words for any of it, but you would have felt it. That sense of pattern, of rhythm, night after night. Certain stars rising and setting in the same places, others shifting slowly. The moon changing shape, the sun returning on schedule. It must have felt like a language. And like any language, someone, somewhere, must have learned to read it. What if that was where civilization began, not in fields of grain or riverside villages, but in the act of watching the sky? Before people built cities, they built calendars. Before they mapped the land, they mapped the heavens. Every early culture we've ever found traces of Egyptian, Mayan, Chinese, Babylonian, Incan carried with it an obsession with the stars. Their monuments align with solstices and equinoxes. Their temples face the rising of specific stars. Even in the ruins we still don't fully understand, like Stonehenge or Nabta Playa or the temples of Teotihuacan, there are alignments that point not to the earth, but to the heavens. It's as though these ancient builders were less interested in the world beneath their feet and more in the one above their heads. It makes you wonder what came first, the belief or the observation. Did people worship the stars because they were bright and beautiful, or because they seemed to move with purpose? When they noticed that the same stars returned each season, bringing floods or harvests, they might have seen them as caretakers. And if certain stars disappeared for months, only to reappear, maybe they were travelers returning from a great cosmic journey. Over time, the sky must have become a library of meaning, each constellation a story, each planet a messenger. And through those stories, people might have built something deeper, a sense of order, of connection, of belonging to a larger rhythm. And yet, there are whispers, both in myth and in science, that something more may have been at play, that somewhere far back in time, a civilization existed that didn't just look at the stars for guidance. They may have built their entire world around them, their cities laid out as mirrors of constellations, their temples designed to echo celestial movements, their lives guided not only by the sun and moon, but by the entire celestial orchestra. Some researchers call this astro-architecture, others see it as coincidence. But if you stand in certain ancient places, Machu Picchu at dawn, the Great Pyramid at the solstice, or Angkor Wat during an eclipse, the precision feels intentional. It's as though the builders were saying, "We see you," to the stars themselves. Maybe that civilization wasn't forgotten entirely. Maybe its knowledge trickled down through generations disguised as myth. Maybe the Greek stories of gods among constellations, or the Dogon's mysterious knowledge of invisible stars, are echoes of an earlier age when humans didn't just observe the sky, they participated in it. Imagine that for them, the stars weren't far away. They were part of the same living system. Their movements reflected the pulse of the earth itself. And so they built accordingly structures that breathed with the sky, societies that rose and rested by celestial rhythm. The night sky, after all, is timeless. It repeats itself in patterns that stretch far beyond any single human life. What one generation observes, the next confirms. Over centuries, those patterns become prophecies, calendars, warnings. The rising of Sirius heralded the Nile flood. The alignment of Venus predicted monsoon winds. To build such knowledge required not just intelligence, but patience, centuries of observation, records passed carefully through generations. If a civilization built its world on that foundation, it wouldn't be reckless or hurried. It would be deliberate, rhythmic, balanced, a reflection of the cosmos itself. And yet, somehow, that harmony was lost. Somewhere along the line, we stopped building with the stars in mind. We built skyscrapers instead of observatories, clocks instead of calendars written in light. Maybe that's what forgetting looks like, not a sudden loss, but a gradual drift away from what once guided us. The question isn't whether such a star-inspired civilization existed, it's whether we're its descendants who simply forgot how to look up. Tonight, we'll try to remember, not by hunting for evidence or demanding proof, but by letting the idea rest in our minds. Because even if the story isn't literal, it carries something true. The stars have always spoken to us, whether through myth or math, through ritual or radio waves. They've shaped our sense of time, our direction, our wonder. And perhaps they once shaped a civilization whose story still hums quietly beneath the surface of our own. So, as you listen tonight, let your imagination drift. Picture those ancient skies, the builders who stood beneath them, the songs they sang to constellations that still shine above you now. Maybe, just maybe, the stars didn't only inspire their civilization, maybe they are still inspiring ours. And with that thought, let's take our first slow step into this journey. 1. The sky that never slept. If you could stand beneath the night sky as it was 10,000 years ago, before lamps and electricity, before engines and cities, you would see a darkness so deep it almost glowed. The stars would spill across the heavens in millions of points, too many to count, so numerous they would cast faint shadows on the ground. The Milky Way would not be a phrase or a photograph, but a luminous river, arcing from one horizon to the other, its reflection shimmering in still water. That sky was not background, it was a living presence. It moved, it breathed, it returned. The first humans who looked up at it did not see distance. They saw connection. The stars were not strangers. They were neighbors that spoke in patterns. Imagine that world for a moment. Nights stretching endlessly. The crackle of fire, the scent of wood smoke, and the low murmur of voices telling stories to fill the spaces between the stars. Above them, constellations drifted Orion hunting, the Pleiades gathering, the bright eye of Sirius watching the horizon. None of these names existed yet, of course. but the awareness did. People noticed which stars rose when certain fruits ripened, which constellations vanished before the first rains came. Over generations, those patterns turned into language. The sky became a kind of clock, a compass, a calendar, and eventually, a teacher. There's something soothing about the idea that civilization may have started with people simply watching the sky. Before there were maps of land, there were maps of light. Those early observers didn't think of astronomy as a science or a religion. It was both and neither. It was survival. It was wonder. To know when the moon would return full again, or when the sun would reach its highest point, meant knowing when to plant, when to hunt, when to rest. The stars offered rhythm to a world that otherwise felt chaotic, and rhythm, in time, became culture. We sometimes picture ancient life as harsh and short, but there's a quiet poetry in imagining those evenings, people lying back against cool stone, the flames fading as eyes adjusted to starlight, thoughts drifting outward. They must have noticed how certain stars seemed to wander while others stayed fixed. The wandering ones became planets, travelers across the steady backdrop. To the earliest minds, these must have seemed alive, moving, purposeful. They returned on schedule, never lost, never random. That steadiness might have inspired imitation. If the heavens have order, they may have thought, perhaps the earth should too. From that seed, the first systems were born, counting, predicting, organizing. The sky was the original library. Over time, these observations deepened. The same stars that once guided nomads across open plains became anchors for entire communities. People began to build fires in deliberate places, forming circles of stone to mirror the stars above. Later, those circles became monuments, built not just to honor the heavens but to interact with them. When the sun rose between two standing stones at the solstice, it wasn't coincidence. It was memory made physical, proof that someone had watched long enough to know where that light would fall. Standing in a place like that today, Stonehenge, Nabta, Playa, the Temple of Karnak, you can almost feel the continuity. The alignment is more than geometry, it's a conversation. It's as if those ancient builders were saying, "We have seen you, and we remember." That act of remembrance is the heart of civilization. To remember is to pass something forward, to give knowledge shape, to turn observation into meaning. The stars became symbols of continuity, of repetition. In a world where lives were brief, the sky was eternal. Think of how the heavens must have felt to those early watchers. Every night, the same vast pattern wheeled overhead. Every night, the same stars kept their places, except for a few: the sun, moon, and planets that traced slow dances through the constellations. Even the small variations, a meteor streaking, a comet appearing, would have felt like messages, personal and direct. When you live close to nature, you notice change intimately. The smallest flicker of difference can feel monumental. And so, perhaps, every unusual light became a story. Over centuries, stories became traditions. And through traditions, people remembered the sky not just with their eyes, but with their hearts. It's easy for us, surrounded by electric glow, to forget how powerful starlight once was. Today, we rarely see more than a few dozen stars through the haze of cities. But to ancient eyes, the night was filled with depth. They could see the slow drift of constellations across seasons, even the faint glow of distant galaxies invisible to most of us now. The sky must have felt alive, breathing through cycles. Darkness wasn't empty, it was inhabited. That awareness might be the origin of reverence itself. Looking up and realizing the world is vast, that you are small, but also that you are part of something enormous and continuous. Sometimes I think about how those first watchers might have felt on particularly still nights, when even the wind seemed to pause, when the stars shimmered like frost on black glass. They might have sensed something that modern life rarely grants us: belonging. Not the belonging of place, but of pattern. The recognition that your life, your heart, your breath, moves in rhythm with the turning of the sky. Each sunrise is a continuation, each sunset a closing of the day's chapter, written in light. And if enough people notice together, you have the beginnings of culture. Eventually, the act of watching itself became sacred. People built temples and observatories not just to measure time, but to feel closer to whatever intelligence they saw reflected in the heavens. The Mayans tracked Venus as if it were a god. The Egyptians oriented their pyramids to the pole star, believing it was the gateway to eternity. Even hunter-gatherers on the open steppes drew constellations in bone carvings, marking star positions tens of thousands of years before formal writing existed. Across continents and eras, the impulse was the same: to anchor human life to the vast, predictable beauty of the cosmos. Maybe that's why myths about the stars persist in every culture. They're not just entertainment, they're continuity, the memory of a time when the night sky was both map and teacher. Some of those stories may have been warnings constellations, marking where food was scarce or where floods came. Others were comfort, reminders that what happens above also happens below. The heavens weren't separate from life, they were its mirror. To live was to participate in that great rhythm, not to stand apart from it. Now, imagine a world where that understanding went even deeper, where people didn't just use the stars for guidance, but for governance. A civilization whose laws, seasons, and architecture all aligned with the heavens. Their society would have been stable, slow, reflective. Their ceremonies would track planetary movements. Their language might have carried echoes of celestial cycles, words pulsing with rhythm like orbits. Such a civilization wouldn't see itself as under the stars, but within them. And if that world ever existed, its traces would be faint, buried not in rock or ruin, but in alignment, geometry, and myth. That's the mystery that lingers. We find scattered hints, temples that face the same stars, structures separated by oceans yet sharing celestial orientations, legends that describe identical constellations in far-flung cultures. Coincidence, perhaps? Or memory shared across ages, diluted but persistent? The memory of a time when night never truly slept, when people and stars spoke the same language of pattern and return. When I look at the modern sky, dimmed by city light, I sometimes imagine those ancient observers still out there in the dark corners of the world, keeping watch. The sky still turns. The same constellations still rise and fall. The earth still hums with that slow cosmic rhythm. The difference is us. We no longer look up long enough to see it. But maybe we can learn again. Maybe by remembering how they watched patiently, reverently, with a sense of connection, we can remember something about ourselves. Because that's what the night sky has always offered. More than guidance or prediction, it offers perspective. To see yourself not as the center, but as a part. To feel that quiet awe that doesn't need explanation. The people who first learned to read the stars may not have had words for it, but they knew its comfort. They built fires beneath it. They told stories into its silence. They lived and died beneath its glow. And somewhere in that long line of watching, civilization began. And so, as we continue this journey tonight, think of those first eyes turned upward, the sky reflected in them like a second universe. The stars have never slept, and neither has their influence. Perhaps the first spark of our forgotten civilization didn't begin with fire or stone, but with that simple act of looking up and listening to the quiet hum of the heavens. 2. Memory written in constellations. If you look closely at the night sky long enough, something begins to happen. The stars, which at first seem scattered and infinite, start to gather themselves into meaning. Lines form between them, faint but deliberate, and suddenly there are patterns. Animals, heroes, rivers, and gods. It's as though the mind, reaching for order in the chaos, paints stories onto the darkness. Every culture did this. Every people who ever looked up at the sky felt that same quiet impulse to connect the dots. But what if it wasn't only imagination? What if those constellations, the great cosmic drawings, weren't just stories told for comfort, but fragments of memory? What if the sky itself once carried the record of a civilization now forgotten, and we've been reading its reflection without realizing it? Imagine a night tens of thousands of years ago, before the first cities, when firelight flickered against cave walls. The people gathered there didn't have maps or libraries. Their knowledge lived in sound and memory, passed from one mouth to another. And when memory is fragile, you protect it by making it visible. The stars became that safeguard. You could point to them, trace them with a finger, and in doing so, remember, a constellation wasn't just a picture, it was a sentence. It could say, when this star rises, the cold returns, or when these two meet, the rains will follow. Over time, whole systems of meaning bloomed from those patterns. The sky became the first text ever written, a text made not of ink or stone, but of light. Across thousands of miles and centuries, people invented different constellations, but the practice itself remained the same. The Greeks saw hunters and lions, the Maya saw serpents and gods, the Chinese mapped imperial palaces and dragons. Yet hidden beneath those different images lay the same structure, stories that preserved the memory of time, season, and survival. Some scholars think constellations may be among humanity's oldest shared technologies, a bridge between memory and navigation. They let travelers cross deserts and oceans without losing their way, following a map that no flood or war could ever erase. It's tempting to think of these constellations as human inventions, but sometimes they feel older than that, older even than our species. There are Aboriginal star stories in Australia that describe the positions of constellations as they were tens of thousands of years ago, long before geological shifts changed the sky's appearance. There are carvings in Europe depicting star clusters that match alignments visible only in the Ice Age sky. How could those patterns survive so long, carried intact through countless generations, unless the stars themselves were the teachers? Unless, in some distant age, the sky wasn't just inspiration, it was instruction. Perhaps that lost civilization, the one we're trying to imagine tonight, saw the heavens not as decoration but as archive. Every movement of a star, every change in brightness, every cycle of appearance and disappearance was a line in their grand celestial record. They may have built their myths as code, preserving astronomical knowledge in the form of story so that it could survive across cataclysms. After all, stone can crumble, but stories can migrate. A people scattered by disaster might lose their cities but keep their constellations. As they resettled, their children would look up and remember. In that way, the night sky became the bridge between epochs, a continuity stretching beyond written history. You can almost feel that intention when you stand beneath ancient monuments aligned to the stars. The Great Pyramids of Giza, arranged to mirror the belt of Orion. The temples of Angkor Wat, positioned to echo the constellation Draco. The layout of Teotihuacan, resonating with the movement of Venus. Each design whispers the same message: as above, so below. The builders weren't copying the sky for beauty's sake, they were synchronizing with it. It's possible they believed the stars themselves carried the blueprint of order, and that by mirroring that order on Earth, they could preserve harmony. The architecture became another form of star writing, a translation of celestial geometry into stone. If you think about it, our ancestors had no separation between science, art, and faith. The sky contained them all. A constellation could be a calendar and a story, a navigation tool, and a hymn. When you teach by stars, you don't just teach where things are. You teach how to feel time. You learn patience by watching slow risings and settings. You learn humility by realizing that your lifetime is only one breath in the rhythm of the cosmos. That awareness shaped the earliest philosophies, long before words like philosophy existed. And maybe that's what we've lost, the sense that knowledge and wonder can be the same thing. When we map the sky now, we use numbers, telescopes, databases. We know the distances, the spectral classes, the redshifts. But the ancient watchers didn't measure. They remembered. They felt the positions of stars as part of their own lives. The reappearance of a certain constellation wasn't an abstraction. It was the return of an old friend, a sign that the world still held meaning. In that way, the constellations were not just pictures but living traditions, always retold, never fully forgotten. There's a quiet theory among some archaeoastronomers, one whispered more in curiosity than conviction, that the world's oldest myths might be echoes of a single, primordial star map. Not a map drawn by any one people, but by a culture so ancient that all later civilizations inherited fragments of its sky language. The flood stories, the celestial serpents, the twin heroes mirrored in the heavens, they appear again and again, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from the Andes to the Himalayas. The patterns differ, but the backbone remains, a sense of descent from the stars, of knowledge once granted and later lost. Suppose that memory wasn't metaphorical. Suppose the constellations we still use, the hunter, the swan, the scorpion, are fossils of thought surviving from a time before nations, before writing, each one a line of an epic so vast we only glimpse its outlines. The story would begin not on Earth but in the sky, and humanity's role would be as witness and recorder. Perhaps that's what consciousness first was, the universe looking back at itself through eyes bright with starlight. Even now, when most of us can't name more than a handful of constellations, we still feel their pull. Children trace the Big Dipper without knowing why it feels important. Lovers find the same star year after year, naming it theirs. Sailors, even with GPS, still glance upward out of habit. The connection is older than memory. It's like muscle memory of the species itself, an ancient recognition that something essential lives in those lights. We don't have to understand them to feel guided by them. There's a quiet beauty in that thought, that maybe we never stopped being part of the story written in the sky. The constellations have changed names, but they haven't gone away. They are still writing to us, even if we've forgotten how to read the script. Every star, every faint shimmer at the edge of vision, carries a story that was once a piece of survival, then became a myth, and finally a mystery. What if those old patterns weren't only reflections of imagination, but signals, records of where we came from, and perhaps where we're meant to return? It's possible that somewhere out there, carved not in stone but in the deep logic of human memory, lies the full celestial record of that forgotten civilization. A memory so old that it now exists only as pattern recognition, as the strange comfort we feel when we look at the stars. It's like a whisper through time, telling us that once, long ago, we understood. The constellations are what remains of that understanding, a vast celestial archive that we continue to gaze at without realizing we're reading. So tonight, as the stars rise over the curve of the earth, try to imagine the generations who looked up before you, their eyes tracing the same patterns, their breath visible in the same cold air, their stories woven into the same glowing fabric. Those stories are still there, waiting to be read again. The sky has never stopped speaking. We've only stopped listening. And perhaps that's what we're doing now, learning, once more, to hear the ancient language written in the constellations, and remembering that they were never just decorations on the night, but the oldest library we ever had. 3. The language of light. There's a moment when the last glow of sunset fades and the first stars begin to appear that feels almost like a breath between worlds. The day retreats, and the night begins to speak, not loudly, not in words, but in quiet points of light scattered across the dark. For most of human history, that language of light was one of our greatest teachers. It told us when to travel and when to stay still, when to plant and when to harvest. But it may have also told us something far deeper, something about how to live, how to think, how to connect with the vast, silent intelligence of the universe. Perhaps the stars weren't just admired, perhaps they were conversed with. Perhaps long before we ever sent messages into space, we were already receiving them. Imagine the earliest observers of the sky, not scientists, not priests, just people. Hunters resting after a long day, a child lying awake beside a fire, a traveller watching the North Star hold steady while the world turned around it. They would have seen patterns not only in the stars themselves but in the way they changed, the shifting colours, the slow drift of brightness, the rhythm of eclipses and comets. To them, these weren't random, they were words. The heavens spoke in repetition, in pulse, in return. If you could learn that rhythm, you could predict. And prediction meant power, the ability to see what would come before it arrived. That was the first kind of wisdom, not control, but harmony with pattern. Somewhere along the line, that harmony became ritual. People began to translate celestial motion into ceremony. Fires lit on mountaintops mirrored the constellations above. Drums echoed the slow throb of planetary conjunctions. The light of the stars was no longer just seen, it was performed, embodied. The night became both teacher and stage. The sky reflected in human movement and sound. There's a certain peace in that image. A community gathered under the same heavens, repeating the same patterns generation after generation, each flicker of fire a heartbeat answering the light above. It's possible that through those rituals, an ancient form of communication was born. Not language as we know it, with sentences and structure, but a kind of resonance. A civilization attuned to the stars might have believed that light was a carrier of thought, that the pulses of stars, their flares and dimmings, were messages travelling across space. We know now that starlight carries information, composition, distance, age, motion. But imagine learning that through intuition alone. A people watching for centuries could have noticed subtle changes in the hue of certain stars long before telescopes and built meanings around them. A brightening might signal abundance, a dimming might warn of loss. And over centuries, that practice would form a code, not superstition, but the beginnings of what we now call science, disguised as myth. Light travels slowly by our measures, but endlessly by its own. The light from a star you see tonight began its journey long before any of us were born. Some of it may have started before humanity itself existed. To watch the stars, then, is to look into the past, to see not what is, but what was. That simple realization must have shaped how ancient people thought about time. The past wasn't gone, it was visible. The future wasn't unknowable, it was implied. And so their stories became circular, their calendars endless loops. Perhaps they didn't think of time as a straight line at all, but as a great orbit, everything returning eventually to where it began. It's easy to forget that we are part of that same story. The atoms in our bodies, every spark in our nerves, every shimmer in our blood, were forged in the hearts of long-dead stars. The language of light is literally written inside us. When we gaze upward, we are seeing where we came from. Maybe that's why it feels so personal, so intimate, even when the distances are unimaginable. It's like hearing an old song that you don't remember learning, but somehow still know by heart. Now picture that forgotten civilization we've been chasing across these chapters, the one that might have built its life around the stars. How might they have interpreted that intimacy? Perhaps they believed that the stars weren't simply suns, but ancestors. Each point of light, a consciousness, a keeper of memory. The more they studied the heavens, the more connections they found between the patterns above and the rhythms below. The movement of the planets matched the tides. The timing of eclipses matched the migrations of animals. Lightning echoed the branching of constellations. If you notice enough parallels, it starts to feel deliberate. It starts to feel like design. So they began to listen. They built structures to capture the light more precisely, stone corridors that framed the rising of particular stars, polished surfaces that reflected moonlight into sacred chambers. Perhaps the great megalithic monuments we see scattered across the world weren't just places of worship, but instruments of observation, like giant harmonic receivers. When the light entered at just the right angle, it might have illuminated carvings or symbols, turning the whole structure into a message that could only be read on specific nights. To those who built them, that must have felt like speaking directly with the universe, an exchange between earth and sky. What's haunting is how similar these structures are across continents. Temples aligned with solstices, pyramids echoing constellations, carvings depicting the same star patterns that no single culture could have invented alone. Either these ideas arose independently, or they were inherited from a shared source, a common teacher written in starlight. Maybe it was the sky itself that taught us. Maybe we all learned the same language of light, then translated it differently according to our needs. Over time, the grammar was lost, the pronunciation blurred, but the longing remained. Even now, we still look up and feel the need to understand, to decode, to belong. There's an elegance in how light works, it reveals, by travelling through darkness. Every beam, no matter how faint, carries the history of its journey. Perhaps those ancient watchers sensed that and built their world around the principle. Knowledge, too, travels through darkness. Each generation must send it forward, hoping it reaches someone in the future who can read it. The stars did that for us, and maybe we've been trying ever since to do the same, to become tiny stars, ourselves, carrying light across time in the form of memory and meaning. When I think of that, I imagine a night far from any city. A calm wind, the air cool, the stars sharp enough to feel infinite. Somewhere out there, long ago, another person stood in the same darkness, looking at the same stars. Their language is gone, their name forgotten, but their gaze, that act of looking up, connects us. The photons that touch their eyes may still be crossing space, traveling outward forever. The light that touched yours tonight will do the same. We are both part of the same conversation, separated by thousands of years but joined by the same quiet curiosity. Maybe that's what the language of light really is, a conversation too vast for any single species or century to finish. Every civilization adds a line or two before passing the sky on to the next. We don't know how to read it completely yet, but perhaps understanding isn't the point. Perhaps it's enough to simply continue, listening, to keep tracing the patterns, to keep reflecting them in our stories and our art. After all, that's what those forgotten people must have done. They watched, they wondered, and they left us hints, alignments in stone, myths of gods made of flame, legends of messages descending from the stars. And so we inherit that tradition, whether we realize it or not. Every time we light a candle, launch a satellite, or whisper a wish to the night sky, we're answering that ancient call. We are still learning to speak in the language of light, the same one that shaped the first civilization and still flickers quietly within us. The stars haven't stopped speaking, they never do. They pulse, they flare, they shimmer, repeating the story of existence in the only way they know how. Through the patient rhythm of illumination and shadow, signal and silence, life and return. And as we listen, perhaps the message is simpler than we think. Maybe the stars are saying what they have always said, that everything which shines, however briefly, is part of something eternal. That to exist, to glow, even for a moment, is to add one more word to the great conversation written across the night. And perhaps, long ago, a civilization understood that completely. They built their lives around it, left their monuments to echo it, and then disappeared back into the dark, trusting, maybe, that one day someone else would look up, understand, and continue the dialogue. 4. Forgotten architects of the sky. There are places on Earth where the horizon feels impossibly far away, flat desert plains, ancient plateaus, high mountain ridges where the sky begins to feel close enough to touch. In those places, the stars seem to rest just above the land, like lanterns waiting to be reached. If you stood there thousands of years ago, without machines or maps, you might have looked upward and felt a question rising inside you. Who placed those lights there, and what did they mean? Some of our ancestors may have asked that same question and then, slowly, over generations, tried to answer it not with words, but with stone. They became the architects of the sky, building what the heavens seemed to show them, monuments that pointed, reflected, and remembered. And though time has buried most of their works beneath dust and sea, their blueprints are still visible at night, shining far above us. It's strange to think that before anyone built walls or palaces, before writing or wheels, people built calendars in stone. Across continents, civilizations that never met somehow mirrored one another in purpose. They arranged earth and rock to follow the stars. In Egypt, massive temples faced the rising of Sirius, whose light heralded the flood of the Nile. In Central America, Mayan pyramids aligned precisely with solstices and equinoxes, marking the turning of seasons through beams of sunlight that slipped perfectly through corridors of carved limestone. In England, Stonehenge, great stones stood as a clock of shadows, measuring midsummer and midwinter. And far older still, in the African Sahara, before it was desert, the people of Nabta Playa arranged stones to track the same celestial patterns. No one told them to. No shared culture connected them. Yet they all looked up and built the sky into the ground. Perhaps that is what the forgotten architects understood best, that the world above and the world below were never truly separate. To build on earth was to speak to the heavens, to echo the geometry of the stars so that time itself could be read and remembered. Their work wasn't about grandeur or even worship. It was about preservation. The stars moved slowly, predictably, patiently, and by anchoring those motions in stone, the architects gave memory a body that could outlast generations. Theirs was a collaboration with eternity. If you visit those ancient places today, you can still feel the intention in their arrangement. Stand within the circle of Stonehenge at dawn, and the sun rises exactly through the Heelstone's notch. Stand at the entrance of the Great Pyramid on a summer night, and Orion's belt sits directly above it. In the Peruvian Andes, the walls of Machu Picchu trace the same lines as the constellation of the Southern Cross. None of it feels accidental. These structures aren't merely placed on the landscape, they are written onto it, as if the earth itself had been turned into a manuscript of light and shadow. The forgotten architects might have thought of themselves as translators, taking what the heavens whispered and giving it form. To them, architecture was language. Every angle, every alignment, every proportion was part of a dialogue between matter and the infinite. The stars offered the pattern, the builders responded with stone. Some scholars see these alignments as coincidence, but coincidence loses meaning when it repeats with such precision across continents and centuries. Perhaps those early engineers shared not just a fascination with the sky, but knowledge inherited from an older source, a civilization that had already begun the great work of mapping heaven onto earth. It's possible that they saw architecture as a way to teach without words. Imagine standing in the courtyard of a temple where sunlight spills through a doorway for only a few minutes each year, illuminating a carving of a god or a symbol. The entire building becomes a clock, a teacher of time. Anyone who witnessed that event would understand. The heavens have rhythm, the stars are faithful, the light returns. In a world of uncertainty, that must have felt like truth solid enough to build a life upon. So they built, and through their building, they remembered. There is something deeply human about that urge to make meaning visible. We still do it, though our temples now are observatories and satellites. The forgotten architects worked with what they had. Stone, shadow, patience. They watched for decades, sometimes lifetimes, charting how stars rose slightly differently each year, how the moon's path shifted, how eclipses repeated in mysterious cycles. With no telescopes, no written calculations, they discovered patterns that modern science later confirmed. They may not have had formulas, but they had fidelity, an attention so unwavering it bordered on reverence. It's easy to romanticize them as mystics, but maybe they were scientists of their own kind, practitioners of precision guided by wonder. They might have kept records not in ink, but in the very placement of their monuments. A single misaligned stone would have been an error in the equation of the universe. Every horizon, every mountain peak, every star was a number in their geometry. Their classrooms were valleys, their textbooks were skies, their mathematics were the distances between light and shadow. And yet, their legacy feels like a whisper. The monuments remain, but their language is lost. We can measure their alignments, but not their intentions. Why did so many of them stop building? What changed? Maybe floods, wars, or climate shifts erased their cities. Maybe their knowledge scattered into folklore. Or perhaps they reached a conclusion so profound that it couldn't be recorded, only lived, and then, over time, forgotten. There's a quiet melancholy in that thought. To imagine a civilization so close to the stars, so patient in its understanding, dissolving back into myth. But maybe that's the natural rhythm of knowledge discovery followed by disappearance, light followed by shadow. What they left behind isn't emptiness, it's invitation. Each fragment of stone, each celestial alignment, is a question still waiting to be answered. Perhaps that's their true gift. They built in such a way that even after thousands of years, we still look up, still wonder, still feel that same pull to connect heaven and earth. If you stand in a field far from cities and tilt your head back, you might feel what they felt. The stars seem fixed, but you know they're moving, and so are you. The planet spins beneath you, turning the whole dome of the sky like a great wheel. Somewhere in that motion lies the reason they built. They must have sensed what we sometimes forget, that the universe isn't something to conquer or understand completely, but something to participate in. Building for the stars was their way of saying, "We see you, and we are part of you." It's comforting to think that long before our telescopes and probes, people already built contact into the world. They didn't wait for the heavens to answer. They spoke first, using stone as their voice. And though we can't hear the words anymore, their echoes remain in geometry, in myth, in the faint memory of a people who refused to see the sky as distant. Maybe those forgotten architects didn't vanish at all. Maybe they became us. Maybe we are the continuation of their work, each generation rebuilding. The dialogue in new forms, cathedrals aligned with light, observatories peering through night, data flowing through invisible networks that circle the Earth like constellations reborn. The materials have changed, but the impulse is the same. We still build to touch the infinite. We still raise our eyes and ask the same quiet question: who are we beneath these stars, and what are we meant to remember? And perhaps, one night, when the last city lights dim and the stars return in their full, unbroken glory, we'll look up and see what they saw the world, not as a collection of separate pieces, but as a single design, written in stone and light, endlessly repeating across time. Maybe then, we'll remember that we were never the first to wonder, and we won't be the last. We are only the newest architects, adding our small line to a design that began long before us, and will continue long after we're gone. 5. The Sky Temples. When night falls in the high deserts of Egypt or the jungles of Central America, something quiet but extraordinary happens. The air cools, the insects soften their chorus, and the stars begin to glow in slow waves above the ruins, columns and stones that have seen thousands of years pass, now bathed again in the same light that once guided their builders. It is as if the heavens are reclaiming them, touching the surfaces carved in their honor. The temples, silent now, begin to speak again, not with words, but with alignment, reflection, and shadow. For those who built them, these were not mere structures. They were bridges between earth and sky, doorways meant to synchronize human life with the rhythm of the cosmos. Every civilization that gazed long enough at the heavens eventually built toward them. In ancient Egypt, temple corridors stretched east to west, welcoming the morning sun as it poured golden light directly through sacred halls, only on specific days of the year. At Abu Simbel, twice a year, sunlight travels through a 1322 narrow passage to illuminate statues deep within the temple, marking a cosmic anniversary of balance and rebirth. In the jungles of Yucatan, the pyramid of Kukulkan casts a shadow of a serpent along its staircase at the spring and autumn equinoxes, slithering toward the earth in a pattern of perfect precision. Farther east, the temple of Angkor Wat was positioned to echo the constellation Draco, its towers rising in mimicry of the serpent of the north. These alignments are not coincidences, they are signatures. Each temple seems to whisper the same truth, that the builders saw the sky as an active participant in their lives. The stars were not distant observers, they were collaborators. To align with the heavens was to join the conversation of existence, to take part in a dialogue that stretched from dust to infinity. The temples were instruments, tuned to celestial music. When the light struck them just right, the melody played a harmony of stone, shadow, and time. Imagine living in such a world. Your days and nights defined not by mechanical clocks, but by the movement of constellations, the rise and fall of the sun through the corridors of sacred architecture. You would wake knowing the stars would return, that light would travel the same path as your ancestors had watched for centuries. The world would feel stable, rhythmic, trustworthy. The temple was not only a place of worship, it was reassurance that the universe itself had a pattern, and that pattern included you. In many of these temples, the architecture does more than frame the stars, it mirrors them. The Great Pyramid's internal shafts point toward Orion and Sirius. The layout of Teotihuacan echoes the orbits of Venus, whose brilliant morning and evening appearances shaped entire calendars. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, layered terraces climbing toward the heavens, were literal stairways of communication, connecting the ground to the divine. Each level represented a different realm of sky, a gradient between human and celestial. To stand at the top was to stand, symbolically, at the threshold between two realities. The builders of these structures seem to understand something that modern minds often overlook. The act of building is an act of remembering. To carve stone in alignment with a star is to preserve a moment that will repeat endlessly through time. Each rising sun and returning constellation reawakens the memory of its construction. The temple becomes a time capsule, not buried but alive, reopening its purpose each year with the turning of the sky. To visit one at the right moment is to experience a connection that collapses centuries, the same beam of light touching the same stone, just as it did for those who first shaped it. There's a stillness inside those ancient spaces that can't be replicated. Even in ruins, they hum. Step into the shadowed halls of Karnak or climb the steps of Chichen Itza at dawn, and you can feel the air waiting. The alignment of light and stone isn't just beautiful, it's deliberate. It gives you the sense that you're part of something rehearsed, something written into the world long before you arrived. The builders might have felt that same sensation as they worked, carving not just for themselves but for all who would come after. Their temples were meant to outlast memory, to serve as reminders of what happens when human hands follow cosmic design. And perhaps that was their true devotion, not to gods in the abstract, but to balance itself. The temples made visible what they must have felt intuitively. That harmony between heaven and earth was not a metaphor but a law. When the seasons fell out of step, when floods came, or droughts lingered, it would have seemed that the dialogue between the worlds had been disrupted. Their ceremonies, their songs, their offerings, these were ways to restore alignment, to speak once more in the language of symmetry and light. The temple wasn't only a house of worship, it was a compass, a reminder of direction, pointing not north or south but upward. The most mysterious thing about these places is how universal they are. Thousands of miles apart, separated by oceans and epochs, civilizations that never met built nearly identical ideas into stone. The same proportions appear in structures from Giza to Peru, the same celestial references in architecture from Babylon to Cambodia. How did they converge? Did the sky itself instruct them, whispering the same mathematics through its patterns? Or were they inheriting fragments of a shared knowledge, passed down from an age so distant that only its architecture survived? Some believe that these alignments were attempts to summon the divine, to open literal channels between Earth and the stars. Others think they were built as schools, where initiates learn to read the heavens like a sacred text. Both possibilities share one truth. The temple was never a static building. It was an instrument, designed to move with light, to perform the choreography of the cosmos. Each sunrise, each solstice, each eclipse was a note in the song, played not for audiences, but for awareness itself. It's moving to think that even now, long after those civilizations vanished, the performance continues. The sun still rises through the gates of Abu Simbel. The serpent shadow still descends the pyramid of Kukulkan. The starlight still touches the summit of Machu Picchu. The architects are gone, their languages erased, their rituals silent, but the synchronization remains. The universe remembers their devotion, even when we do not. Perhaps that is why these ruins feel alive. They aren't relics. They're still functioning, still catching light, still measuring time, still fulfilling the purpose written into them. And maybe that's why standing among them feels strangely intimate, like overhearing a conversation between the earth and the sky that never ended. It's a quiet reassurance that no, creation built in alignment with wonder is ever truly lost. If we think of those temples as messages, then what were they trying to say? Maybe it was simple. We were here, and we understood. Or perhaps they were leaving instructions, not in words but in proportion, teaching future generations how to find harmony again when memory fades. The temples remind us that beauty and knowledge were never meant to be separate. They are the same impulse, the desire to reflect the order of the stars in the shape of our world. And when you look up tonight, perhaps you'll sense it, the faint echo of that architecture in your own gaze. Every temple, every pyramid, every carved stone pointed toward the same mystery you're watching now. The stars are still there, waiting to be noticed, waiting for someone to remember the ancient agreement between light and life. The builders may be forgotten, but the dialogue continues, written in the same soft radiance that once poured through their sacred halls. Maybe that's what their temples were always meant to ensure, that long after their words had turned to dust, the earth would still mirror the heavens, and some quiet soul, standing centuries later beneath the same sky, would feel the alignment again and know it was never truly lost. 6. Stone as a memory device. There is a kind of silence that only ancient stone can hold, the silence of time pressed into shape, the quiet weight of memory that outlives the people who placed it there. When you walk through the remains of temples, pyramids, and forgotten observatories, you begin to feel it, the sense that these places are not just ruins, but recordings. They are messages left in the language of alignment and endurance, built to speak across centuries. The stones remember what the people once knew, even when their words and names have vanished. They stand as both monument and memory, storing knowledge in their geometry and orientation. Long before books or hard drives, long before data was something we could hold in our hands, stone was Earth's first archive. If you pause and imagine how those first builders thought about time, it changes everything. They didn't see time as we do a straight line of progress marching forward, but as a circle, a rhythm that repeated. To them, memory wasn't something stored away, it was something lived through, again and again, as the stars and seasons returned. The only question was how to remember accurately enough to align one cycle with the next. Their solution was to carve their memory into matter, to make remembrance physical. Every monolith, every pillar, every temple wall that caught the morning light was an entry in a library too vast for paper. Think of Stonehenge or the pyramids of Giza or the great circles scattered across the British Isles and the deserts of the Middle East. Each was more than architecture, it was a way of writing. The builders didn't have alphabets yet, but they had shadow, light, and orientation. The stones faced specific points on the horizon where the sun or moon would rise on particular days. They marked time, not in hours, but in years, in centuries, in the long, patient motion of the heavens. The pattern of the stones was the text. To walk among them was to read a story told through geometry, the plot unfolding each time the sun struck the right angle. Perhaps that is why these places feel so alive even now. The energy we sense in them isn't magic or mystery, it's memory activating. The stones respond to light in the same way they always have, performing the same ancient calculation, whispering the same story about the alignment between earth and sky. Even when no one watches, the dialogue continues. The rising sun still completes the equation the builders began. In that way, stone is not static at all. It's a slow, breathing technology, one that measures time on the scale of eternity. Modern archaeologists sometimes call these alignments astronomical markers, but that phrase feels too small. To those who placed them, they were more like anchors. They held the world steady. In a universe where everything moved, the stones were the points of stillness, the places where the sky could be caught and remembered. The builders must have known they wouldn't live to see the next great alignment, or the one after that, yet they built anyway, shaping the horizon for descendants they would never meet. It's one of the most generous acts imaginable, to record a truth in a medium designed to last beyond death. There's a quiet comfort in realizing that we are surrounded by such messages, still functioning long after their makers are gone. When sunlight touches the same corner of a carved wall at the solstice, when moonlight falls along an ancient corridor exactly as it did thousands of years ago, that is memory at work. The earth is remembering itself through these creations, keeping track of the rhythm between its rotation and the stars that guided it. The people who built these monuments may have vanished, but their understanding remains encoded in the architecture. It's as if the stones themselves became caretakers of cosmic knowledge, patient and precise in their silence. Some of the most remarkable examples lie hidden or half forgotten. The megaliths of Nabta Playa, buried in desert sands, the alignments of the Karnak stones in France stretching for miles, the sun-tracking temples of Chaco Canyon in North America. Each was built by people separated by oceans and time, yet all shared the same impulse: to anchor light, to preserve pattern. It's as though they all knew, consciously or not, that the stars would move on and humanity might forget, but the earth would keep turning, and the stones would still be here to remind us how to look up. In that way, these monuments are less like records and more like mirrors. They reflect not just the sky, but our capacity for wonder. To build something so enduring, so precisely aligned, is to admit belief in the future, that someone will one day stand where you stood and need to know what you knew. The stones become a bridge across time, their message simple yet profound. Remember the rhythm, remember the order, remember that we once watched together. When you think of stone as memory, even geology begins to feel sacred. The cliffs, the mountains, the ancient seabeds turn to rock. All of them are archives, storing ages within their layers. The builders must have sensed that too. Perhaps that's why they trusted stone more than any other material. It doesn't burn. It doesn't rot. It doesn't fade with ink. It erodes, yes, but slowly, gracefully, as if it understands the passage of time rather than resists it. A civilization that thought in cycles, not in progress, would have found great wisdom in that. Stone remembers, but it also forgets slowly enough to let the next cycle begin. And yet, even stone is not eternal. Wind, rain, and earthquakes have toppled monuments, erased inscriptions, buried whole cities. Maybe that, too, was part of the plan. The builders must have known that everything eventually returns to dust. Their goal wasn't permanence, it was rhythm. They didn't need their works to last forever. They needed them to last long enough for us to find them again. And here we are, thousands of years later, standing among their fragments, still deciphering, still feeling the pull of their purpose. When we build today, we often think in decades, sometimes in centuries if we're ambitious. But the ancient builders thought in millennia. Their memory systems weren't fragile, they were planetary. Even if languages died and borders shifted, the stars would always rise where they had before, and the stones would always point toward them. That's why so many of these structures feel simultaneously local and cosmic. They belong to their landscape, yet they speak to something much larger than any one place or culture. They are memory-made universal. If you stand among those stones on a clear night and watch the shadows drift, you might feel time blur. The air feels thicker there, not because of superstition but because of scale. You can sense centuries pressing against one another, the living and the long gone sharing the same alignment of light. The stone doesn't care who stands before it. Its memory activates for anyone who witnesses. That is its quiet generosity. It offers continuity to all who notice. In that sense, the forgotten civilization that once built with such precision may not be gone at all. Its consciousness persists in the structures that continue to perform their celestial rituals. Every rising sun that strikes those ancient faces is an echo of the first time the builders watched it happen. Every modern gaze that lingers on them completes the intention they set in motion. They built not for themselves, but for participation, for connection across time, between those who could see the pattern and those who one day would remember to look. Perhaps that's the secret behind their silence. The stones don't need to speak because they are still working. They are still measuring, still aligning, still translating the sky into something solid enough to touch. They are the memory of the earth itself, written not in words, but in weight and light. To walk among them is to step into a recording still playing, to become part of the message it carries. And maybe, in some quiet way, that message is for us to remind us that memory isn't just what we keep in our minds, but what we choose to anchor in the world. The stars may move, and civilizations may fall, but as long as we build with intention, as long as we align ourselves to something larger than our lifetimes, the pattern continues. The stones will remember, even when we forget, and one day, long after us, someone else will stand in the same light, feel the same hush, and understand that they, too, are part of the memory written in stone. 7. When heaven and earth were one, there must have been a time, long before our calendars and clocks divided life into hours and deadlines, when people did not think of the heavens and the earth as separate realms. The sky was not above them, it was around them, inside them, woven into every movement of their lives. When the wind stirred, it was the same breath that turned the stars. When rain fell, it was as if the clouds had descended to touch the soil that birthed them. To live then was to inhabit both worlds at once, the grounded and the celestial, the seen and the infinite. And perhaps that sense of unity, that deep belonging to the cosmic order, was the foundation upon which humanity first learned to live in rhythm rather than in conquest. In those early ages, people must have felt no division between sacred and ordinary. The heavens were a living landscape that moved and changed like the seasons. The same forces that caused stars to shift also made the rivers flood and the trees bloom. A storm was not simply weather, it was the earth speaking in the language of the sky. A sunrise was not a beginning, and a sunset not an end. They were both continuations of the same eternal cycle, mirrored in birth and death, in inhale and exhale. To them, existence wasn't something they were trapped within, It was something they participated in. The boundary between heaven and earth was not a line, but a heartbeat. Imagine living that way, where every act was a conversation with the cosmos. When you planted seeds, you did it according to the position of the moon. When you built a house, you faced it toward the rising of a specific star. Even your sleep followed celestial rhythms, your dreams echoing the phases of the moon and the distant migration of constellations. People didn't just observe the heavens, they lived in step with them, as dancers follow the rhythm of a drumbeat. The pattern of the stars was the choreography, and life itself was the dance. It is difficult for us to imagine such closeness now. Our world feels divided, the sky remote and unreachable, a place reserved for astronauts and telescopes. We think of the heavens as a domain of science, not of spirit. But for most of human history, it wasn't like that. The stars were personal. They looked down upon villages and fires, reflected in the eyes of every living creature. Each constellation was both a map and a mirror, showing not only where one was, but who one was. The heavens were not a mystery to be solved. They were a companion to be understood. The unity between heaven and earth may have been most visible in how early civilizations built their lives. The farmers of the Nile and the Indus didn't simply work the land, they tuned it to celestial rhythm. Floods came when certain stars appeared. Harvests began when specific constellations re-emerged from the horizon. The night sky was a calendar, yes, but also a compass and a philosophy. It taught that life, like the heavens, moved in repeating cycles. No failure was final, no success was permanent. Everything would return in its season. This understanding gave rise to a kind of peace that modern minds rarely know, the peace of alignment. When heaven and earth were one, there was no need to choose between faith and fact, myth and science. They were threads of the same tapestry. The stars were the evidence, the temple, and the myth all at once. To gaze at them was to remember the origins of all things, the pulsing center of being. The Sumerians called the stars the writing of the gods. The Egyptians saw the Milky Way as the reflection of the Nile flowing through the heavens. The Greeks believed their heroes were placed among the constellations not as decoration, but as guardians of balance. The earth was not the opposite of the sky, it was its continuation, a reflection of the same divine geometry drawn in matter instead of light. There's a subtle wisdom in that worldview. It teaches that separation is illusion, that everything visible has an invisible twin. Mountains mirror constellations, rivers mirror the Milky Way. Even human beings were seen as small versions of the cosmos, each heartbeat an echo of celestial motion, each breath a microcosm of the winds that move between the stars. In some ancient traditions, the human body was literally mapped to the heavens, the head aligned with the North Star, the limbs pointing toward the solstices, the pulse mirroring lunar cycles. The body, the land, and the sky were all one system of harmony, each movement reflecting the other. Maybe that's why their world felt alive. For them, everything had presence. Stones were not dead, they were the bones of the earth, resonating with the same vibration as the planets. Water was the bloodstream of creation. Fire was starlight brought down to earth. To light a fire at night was not to oppose the darkness, but to join the stars in their glow. It was a gesture of kinship. Every element we now separate into categories of science or superstition once belonged to a single family of meaning. And maybe, somewhere deep inside us, it still does. The idea of heaven and earth as one also shaped how ancient people treated their environment. When the world around you is sacred, you do not take from it carelessly. You give thanks. You offer something in return. Each harvest, each hunt, each use of water was balanced by ritual and by acknowledgement. This wasn't just reverence, it was reciprocity. They knew that to harm the earth was to disturb the sky's reflection. Disharmony in one would echo in the other. Perhaps their myths of angry gods and punished lands were not primitive fears, but poetic ways of explaining ecological truth. Imbalance above or below eventually restores itself, sometimes through gentle correction, sometimes through catastrophe. It's easy to see why later generations turned their temples into reflections of that union. The great ziggurats of Mesopotamia The pyramids of Egypt and Mesoamerica, even the sacred mountains of the Andes, all were attempts to create bridges between the realms. The ascending steps of stone mirrored the descending paths of starlight. Each was a physical prayer, a meeting point where human effort reached upward and celestial grace reached down. To stand on the highest level was to exist halfway between worlds. But slowly, something shifted. As societies grew more complex, as knowledge became specialized, that sense of unity began to fragment. The sky became the domain of priests and astronomers, while the earth belonged to farmers and kings. The sacred and the practical separated. The stars were still watched, but less for meaning and more for prediction. The language of harmony became the language of calculation. The heavens were still beautiful, but they were no longer home. The song between the worlds grew quieter, replaced by words we could measure but not feel. And yet, the memory never vanished completely. It lingers in our myths, in our art, in the way we still use phrases like "under the same sky" or "written in the stars." It lives in the instinct to look up when we are lost or hopeful or in love. It lives in our desire to find order in chaos, to connect what we see to something larger and unseen. Even in the most modern city, surrounded by metal and light, people still stop and look at the moon. For a brief moment, that old connection reawakens. Heaven and earth become one again, not in temples or rituals, but in a single shared breath beneath the same expanse. Perhaps that's what the forgotten civilization understood so well, and what we are beginning to remember. The union of heaven and earth was never a metaphor. It was a reality of perception. They didn't see two worlds, only one, endlessly reflecting itself in different forms. When they watched the stars, they were watching themselves, and when they cared for the land, they were caring for the cosmos. The truth they lived by was simple. Whatever happens in one realm echoes in the other. To live well on earth was to live rightly among the stars. And maybe, if we listen closely enough, that truth still hums beneath the noise of our age. Every sunrise and moonrise, every tide and season, is an invitation to return to that harmony. The heavens have not withdrawn. They still arc above us, patient and luminous, waiting for us to remember that they were never separate from the ground beneath our feet. The earth and the sky were once one world, and perhaps they always have been. It is only our memory that has drawn a line between them. And the moment we erase it again, even in our thoughts, the old song returns, quiet but clear, reminding us that we have never truly fallen out of the rhythm of the stars. 8. The Lost Mapmakers. There are moments, standing beneath the endless sprawl of stars, when you feel that someone has already been here before you, not in body, but in thought. You sense an invisible design, something too deliberate to be chaos, too ancient to be ours alone. It's as if the universe carries faint fingerprints of minds that once knew how to read it completely, as if long before our history began, there were people or beings who charted not just the land, but the heavens themselves. They were the lost mapmakers, the ones who saw Earth not as an isolated sphere of stone and water, but as one coordinate within a vast, breathing cosmos. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine their work. A quiet world, lit only by fire and stars. Groups of watchers gathered on high plains or cliff edges, marking the rising and setting of constellations. They weren't merely stargazing, they were measuring the fabric of existence, translating light into form. Their tools were simple stones, sightlines, patience, but their precision was profound. They didn't just map where the stars were, they mapped how they moved, and perhaps, most wondrous of all, they mapped how those motions resonated with life on Earth. The rhythms of oceans, the migrations of animals, the pulse of seasons. For them, cartography wasn't confined to geography. It was sacred geometry, an attempt to understand the correspondence between heaven and soil. Some of their maps still exist, though we may not recognize them as such. Ancient city grids, temple alignments, spiral carvings etched into rock faces, all echoing celestial patterns. When modern archaeologists discovered that the layout of the Egyptian pyramids mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, it was treated as a marvel, but perhaps, to the lost mapmakers, it was merely common sense. Why wouldn't the blueprint of a civilization match the heavens? To live in harmony with the cosmos meant arranging one's home as a reflection of it. Their maps weren't tools for conquest, they were invitations to belonging. Maybe that's the greatest difference between their way of seeing and ours. Today, maps define ownership, borders, divisions, distances. But for the ancients, mapping was an act of communion. To chart a river or a constellation was to recognize its place in the whole, to affirm that everything, from the smallest grain of sand to the farthest star, shared a single story. They didn't divide the world into known and unknown. The unknown was simply the part of the sky that had yet to rise. It's easy to imagine those mapmakers working generation after generation, passing down their observations like a sacred duty. Children learning to measure shadow lengths at dawn, elders teaching how to track the slow drift of constellations through the centuries. Their memories would have stretched farther than ours do today, not in years, but in cycles. They would have thought not of decades, but of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that shifts the stars' positions over millennia. To us, that's an astronomical curiosity. To them, it may have been the heartbeat of time itself. They might have built their monuments not just to honor the heavens, but to mark their changing relationship with them, to remember that even the sky evolves. There's something profoundly humbling in that. We like to think of progress as linear, that we are always moving forward, always knowing more. But what if the deepest understanding lies not in discovery, but in remembrance? The lost mapmakers may have known things we've forgotten precisely because they didn't separate knowledge from reverence. Their science was also prayer, their observation also awe. When they marked a star's position, they weren't just noting coordinates, they were acknowledging kinship. Some legends hint that their knowledge went beyond our current understanding. Stories of vast maps carved into the earth itself, patterns only visible from the sky. The Nazca lines of Peru, for instance, massive figures and geometries, drawn across the desert, stretching for miles, as though made for eyes that viewed from above. We debate whether they were offerings, calendars, or messages, but maybe they were all three. Perhaps they were coordinates in a dialogue too large for a single civilization to complete a conversation between Earth and the stars, written in scale grand enough for the universe to notice. Even our oldest myths carry fragments of that memory. The Dogon of West Africa tells stories of star beings who shared celestial maps of Sirius, including details modern science confirmed only in the 20th century. The Polynesian navigators of the Pacific crossed vast oceans using only the stars. Their maps carried not on paper, but in the mind a living constellation that travelled within them. And in every culture's oldest stories, there are always teachers from the sky, gods or ancestors, or visitors who showed humans how to measure, how to build, how to remember. Could those myths be memories of the lost mapmakers? Perhaps they weren't gods at all, but humans who had learned to see the universe in ways we no longer do. If you think about it, mapping is one of the purest expressions of curiosity. To map something is to admit that it matters, that its existence deserves to be traced and known. The lost mapmakers might have seen the entire cosmos as something to be mapped not for possession, but for understanding. Their maps may not have been drawn on parchment or carved in stone alone. They may have existed in song, in ritual, in dance. Each constellation, each horizon, carried not only spatial information but emotional and spiritual weight. Their maps were alive because they were meant to be felt, not just seen. Imagine standing beside one of them on a night thousands of years ago, looking up as they gesture toward a cluster of stars. They trace invisible lines between them, and suddenly the sky becomes a network, a geometry of meaning. They tell you that one point marks the season of rain, another the migration of herds, another the time to plant or to mourn. You realize that what they are showing you isn't a chart of the heavens, but a chart of life itself. You begin to understand that in mapping the stars, they were mapping the human soul. Perhaps that's the true reason we feel so drawn to the sky even now. It's not just beauty that captivates us, it's recognition. Somewhere deep within, we still carry the imprint of those ancient maps. The positions of the stars may have shifted, but the pattern remains inside us, waiting to be remembered. Every time we trace constellations or send satellites into orbit, we're continuing the work they began. We are still map makers, though our tools have changed. Our charts are digital now, glowing screens instead of glowing embers, but the impulse is the same: to connect the dots, to understand our place among the stars. Maybe one day, when we finally map the cosmos completely, we'll find something unexpected. Not emptiness, not distance, but familiarity. We'll look at the grand design of galaxies and realize that it mirrors the patterns our ancestors once carved into stone and sand. We'll understand that the universe was never uncharted, it was always known, always mapped, through hearts that could see unity where we now see separation. The lost mapmakers are gone, but their work continues in us. Every satellite orbit, every telescope image, every diagram of stars is a modern echo of their devotion. We may use different languages now, but the desire is the same: to find meaning in the vastness, to know where we stand in relation to the infinite. Their maps may have faded, but the act of mapping never stopped. It lives in the simple wonder of looking up and tracing the heavens with our eyes, whispering silently, "I see you, I remember." And perhaps, if the stars could answer, they would whisper back that they remember too, that the lines drawn long ago still exist, that the conversation between heaven and earth has never been broken. It continues, every night, as light travels and eyes lift, as maps are drawn and rediscovered. The lost mapmakers are not lost at all. They are the quiet pulse of human memory, guiding us home through constellations, through centuries, through the endless unfolding of the sky. 9. Echoes in myth. Every civilization that ever looked up at the night sky eventually began to tell stories about it. Perhaps it began simply a parent pointing to a bright cluster of stars, describing them as a hunter or a river or a tree of light, so their child could remember which ones rose before the rainy season. But over generations, those small explanations turned into something greater. They became myths, vast, luminous tapestries of story that wove together the sky, the earth, and the human heart. And within those myths, something extraordinary happened. Knowledge and imagination merged. Facts became symbols, and symbols became vessels of memory. The result was that the sky became a library of stories, and every culture filled it with its own echo of truth. When you trace those stories across continents, they begin to sound strangely familiar. In Greece, Orion was a hunter placed among the stars after his death. In the far north, the Inuit told of the same pattern as a group of hunters chasing a bear across the heavens. In the southern skies, the same shape was seen as a warrior. Different lands, different languages, but the same arrangement of light interpreted through the same human instinct to give the sky a soul, and in doing so, to remember something larger than themselves. Myths are echoes of that remembering. They repeat the same rhythm, the same melody of wonder, passed from one civilization to another, like a song whose words change but whose tune never does. It's tempting to think of myth as fantasy, but to the people who created them, they were more than stories. They were instruction manuals, written in poetry. They carried lessons about the seasons, the floods, the movements of animals, and the cycles of the stars. A myth about a sky goddess giving birth to the sun wasn't just divine narrative. It was an observation of dawn, the rebirth of light after the long night. A tale of twin brothers chasing one another through the sky might have been a way of describing the alternating appearance of Venus as morning and evening star. The myths carried coded astronomy, meteorology, and philosophy. They were the first textbooks written not on paper, but in starlight. And yet, beyond all the practical wisdom they contained, there's another layer that feels more elusive, something emotional, almost haunting. When you listen to old myths, you begin to sense that they're not only about the stars, but about something we've lost. They speak of times when humans walked with gods, when the boundary between the celestial and the earthly was thin, when knowledge flowed freely between the heavens and the earth. It's as though every culture carries a memory of a time before separation, when the stars spoke and we could understand them. Whether that was ever literally true hardly matters. What matters is that it feels true. Something in us recognizes it. Some stories go even further, hinting that the heavens once reached down. The Sumerians wrote of beings from the stars who descended to teach writing, architecture, and agriculture. The Maya told of sky serpents who brought the knowledge of time. The Dogon people of Africa described Sirius as a twin star system, long before telescopes could confirm it. And though modern minds may dismiss these as coincidences or symbolic language, It's worth wondering, how did so many unconnected civilizations share such similar themes? Gods or ancestors arriving from the sky, teaching order, teaching structure, and then departing with the promise that they would one day return. Maybe they were never meant as literal histories, but as reflections of an older truth, that everything we know was inspired by looking upward. The heavens were always the first teacher. Even the structure of many myths mirrors the movement of celestial cycles. The hero's journey from descent into darkness to triumphant return echoes the sun's nightly passage beneath the world and its rebirth at dawn. Creation myths that begin with chaos and end in order reflect the steady pattern of the stars emerging from dusk. The concept of divine balance, found in myths from Egypt to China, parallels the equinoxes, when day and night share equal length. It's as if humanity, watching the same sky for millennia, began to internalize its rhythm, retelling it endlessly through different voices and symbols. Myths became a way of translating the language of the cosmos into human feeling. Sometimes I wonder if myths were also the first memory banks of civilization. When floods or wars erased cities, stories survived. When languages changed, myths adapted. They could be spoken around fires, sung in rituals, drawn on walls. Unlike monuments, they didn't need to stand, they could travel. A child in one generation could inherit an entire cosmology simply by listening. Perhaps that's why so many myths are told in circles, stories that loop endlessly, beginning where they end. They weren't meant to be linear histories, they were meant to be remembered forever. And within that remembering lies a subtle pattern, a kind of collective dream shared across humanity. The names differ: Ra, Quetzalcoatl, Pangu, Vishnu. But their roles often overlap. Each one brings light out of darkness, order from chaos, life from stillness. Each is a reflection of the same cosmic principle, told through local language. The deeper you look, the more the differences dissolve. It's almost as if the myths themselves are constellations, unique clusters of story that, when seen from afar, form one grand picture. Maybe the myths weren't created separately at all. Maybe they were fragments of a single narrative, scattered like starlight across the ages, each culture remembering a different part. The echoes are not limited to the stars. Many myths describe sacred mountains, world trees, or ladders reaching toward the heavens, symbols of connection, of communication between the earthly and the celestial. The ancient Babylonians built ziggurats that mirrored these ideas, stairways meant for gods to descend and mortals to ascend. The Norse told of Yggdrasil, the great tree connecting all realms. The Maya envisioned the ceiba tree reaching from the underworld to the heavens. Different lands, different eras, but always the same message. There is a bridge between worlds, and it can be crossed. Perhaps that bridge was not a physical structure but a state of mind. When people looked up at the stars and saw meaning instead of randomness, they were crossing it. Myth was the tool that allowed them to step beyond the immediate and see the eternal. In that sense, every story was both a map and a memory, a reminder that the universe is not indifferent, but alive with reflection and dialogue. Myths gave shape to that dialogue. They reminded people that they were not just observers of the cosmos, but participants in it. And maybe that's why, even now, we still tell stories about the stars. We might call them science fiction or fantasy now, but they serve the same purpose. They let us imagine contact with something greater than ourselves. They remind us that we are still children of the cosmos, still reaching, still wondering. The myths of the past have simply evolved into the myths of the future. The details change: spaceships instead of chariots, constellations instead of gods, but the longing remains identical. We still listen for the voice of the stars, still hope to find our reflection in their light. In the end, myths endure because they hold something timeless. They are echoes of the first questions we ever asked, carried forward through every generation. They remind us that truth doesn't always arrive as data or proof. It sometimes arrives as story, soft enough to enter the heart. The lost civilization we imagine may not have left us books or machines, but perhaps they left something more lasting. The instinct to remember through narrative, to encode the wisdom of the stars into tales of gods and heroes, so that we would never completely forget. So when you hear an old myth, when you see a constellation and recall its ancient name, Try to listen beneath the story. There's a voice there, ancient and patient, repeating a message humanity has been hearing since the beginning. It says that we are not alone, that we never were, that the stars have always been speaking, and our myths are the echo of their song softened by time, but still audible to anyone who listens long enough. 10. The visitor's theory. There's a particular stillness that settles over the world in the late hours of night, the hour when even the wind seems to pause, and the stars gleam a little sharper, as though the universe itself is holding its breath. It's during that stillness that an ancient thought sometimes slips through our minds, one that has lingered in the human imagination for as long as stories have existed. What if we were never alone? What if the stars that watch us were not just distant fires, but the homes of others, beings older, wiser, and perhaps once nearer than we think? It's a thought that has haunted myths, religions, and philosophies from the very beginning, always taking new shapes but carrying the same pulse. The visitor's theory, as it might be called, is not just about aliens or travelers from distant systems. It's about the possibility that the universe has never been silent, that the spark of civilization itself may have been lit by something that came from beyond. When people of ancient times looked up at the sky, they didn't see emptiness. They saw motion, intention, stories written in light. The stars weren't separate worlds, they were other fires, other lives, watching and sometimes interacting with the earth below. Many myths, as we've already seen, speak of teachers descending from the heavens gods who arrived in bursts of light, bringing knowledge, tools, and order. To our modern ears, these sound like legends, but they may also sound faintly like reports, descriptions of encounters, retold so many times that the details softened into allegory. Perhaps, long ago, someone saw something fall from the sky that wasn't a meteor, and instead of calling it a machine, they called it a god. It's important to remember that the ancient world did not separate the natural from the divine. A being from the sky didn't need wings or magic, it simply needed to come from beyond the horizon of the known. Visitors from the stars would have been understood as part of the same continuum as the stars themselves, sacred, luminous, and full of meaning. To meet one would be to glimpse the universe in motion, to see intelligence mirrored at a cosmic scale. And so, the story of arrival, the descent of wisdom from above, became one of humanity's oldest and most persistent themes. What's fascinating is how global that theme is. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were said to have descended from the heavens to shape human destiny. The Dogon spoke of the Nommo, amphibious teachers from Sirius. The Hopi tell of the Kachinas, sky beings who guided and protected. The Maya described the gods as shining serpents who brought calendars and writing. Even in the far islands of the Pacific, legends tell of luminous ancestors who came from the stars, taught the people, and promised to return. None of these cultures had contact with one another, yet they share the same pattern. Beings descending from the sky, imparting knowledge that elevated humanity, and then vanishing into myth. It's almost as if, across continents and centuries, humanity was remembering the same event in different languages. Of course, modern skepticism has turned such stories into metaphor. We assume they describe imagination rather than experience. But if we let the idea breathe, if we let it drift quietly through the mind, it becomes strangely reasonable. The universe is vast, older than we can grasp. Stars have been forming and dying for billions of years before Earth even existed. To believe that only one planet ever developed consciousness might be the greater leap of faith. Perhaps, long before we learned to send signals outward, others had already learned to travel between worlds. Perhaps they came not to conquer, but to seed, to plant sparks of awareness, to see where life could grow and how it would evolve. Imagine such a visitation not as flashing lights or roaring engines, but as something subtle, almost invisible. A gift of knowledge, an idea whispered through the collective dream of the species, a gentle nudge toward complexity, toward art, toward curiosity. Maybe what we call intelligence was not an accident of evolution, but a kind of inheritance. Maybe we are the result of contact so ancient that it now feels like instinct. The visitors might not have needed to leave monuments or messages. They could have left something far more enduring memory embedded in our very pattern of thought. There's an ache in that idea, a mix of awe and melancholy. Because if it's true, then everything we've built, our languages, our sciences, our civilizations, might be the continuation of someone else's project. We would not be the first authors of our story, but its inheritors. And yet, that thought isn't diminishing, it's comforting. It means we are part of something larger, a chain of creation that stretches across the stars. It means that in every act of discovery, we are, in a sense, answering a question that was asked long before us. You can feel that echo in the architecture of the Partiks, the world's oldest sacred sites. The pyramids, the stone circles, the alignments with the solstices and equinoxes, they seem built not just for human eyes, but for cosmic ones. They face outward, toward the heavens, as if awaiting an audience. Some researchers, tracing their geometry, find proportions that correspond to orbital distances or planetary ratios. Coincidence perhaps, but to those who built them, it may have been intentional, a way of saying, "We remember you, we are still listening." If the visitors once came, the temples may have been messages sent back, the earth answering in stone. And what if they never left entirely? What if their influence lingers, not in machines or monuments, but in the persistent feeling that we belong to the stars? Even now, when we send probes beyond our solar system, we mark them with maps and greetings, as if hoping someone will read them. It's the same instinct that carved the first constellations, the desire to be seen, to be known, to join the conversation of the universe. Maybe that instinct is their legacy, the part of us that remembers the sky not as foreign, but as home. Still, the visitor's theory isn't just about where we came from. It's about what happens when the boundary between heaven and earth blurs, when ideas fall from the sky and become part of us. The ancients may have seen literal beings, we might see inspiration. Both are forms of contact. When a mathematician glimpses a new equation in a dream, when an artist sees an image no one else has imagined, when a child looks up and feels, inexplicably, that the stars are alive, those might be the same transmissions continuing in new forms. Perhaps the visitors don't need ships anymore. Perhaps they speak through wonder. Of course, none of this can be proven. And maybe that's the point. Some truths aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be pondered, to open the heart as much as the mind. The ancients, who lived closer to the sky, understood that mystery isn't an obstacle to knowledge, it's the doorway to it. The visitor's theory, at its gentlest, reminds us that curiosity itself might be a signal that the act of wondering is how the universe continues its conversation with us. So tonight, if you find yourself under a clear sky, take a moment to look up and imagine that you are being watched not in fear, but in kinship. Maybe somewhere, light years away, a being of light and dust is looking back, sensing your gaze across the long bridge of time. Maybe they remember this planet, this small world of water and green, and the first civilization they inspired to look up and listen. And maybe, as you stand there wondering, a part of you already knows the truth, that the stars have never been silent, and we have never truly been alone. And if that thought lingers as you drift towards sleep, let it be a gentle one. The visitors, if they were ever real, may not be strangers at all. They may simply be the echo of what we are becoming, the universe, reaching back through its own creation to remind itself of where it began. 11. The Great Forgetting. There is a strange quiet in history gaps, where something seems to have been lost, where the record fades and memory dissolves into myth. We know of great civilizations that rose and fell, but between them there are shadows, empty spaces where knowledge should have continued. It is as though the world once remembered more than it does now, and at some point we collectively forgot. This forgetting is not just about buildings crumbling or languages dying. It feels deeper, almost spiritual, as if an entire way of seeing the universe slipped away. The Great Forgetting might be the most human event of all, not a catastrophe of fire or flood, but of silence. The slow fading of a song that once connected us to the stars. You can see traces of it everywhere, if you look gently. Ancient ruins aligned perfectly with celestial events, even though their builders supposedly lacked the means to measure such precision. Myths that speak of lost ages, golden times when knowledge flowed like rivers between heaven and earth. Symbols repeated across continents, spirals, serpents, suns appearing in cultures that had no contact with one another. It's as if the memory of something vast was scattered like ash, carried by the wind of generations, until only the faintest embers remained glowing in story and stone. Perhaps the forgetting began not with disaster, but with comfort. As civilizations grew and cities rose, the night sky dimmed under the glow of fires, then lamps, and eventually electricity. The stars, once our calendar and compass, became decoration too distant to matter. We built walls to protect ourselves from the elements, and in doing so, we shut out the voice of the heavens. The constellations faded from memory not because they moved, but because we stopped looking up. Knowledge became a thing written in books instead of built into the bones of our lives. Slowly, the rhythm of the cosmos was replaced by the rhythm of clocks. It's hard to notice forgetting while it happens. It feels like progress. You build, you innovate, you create tools that seem to make life easier. But each invention that separates you from the natural world also separates you from the cosmic one. The first time someone lit a fire bright enough to erase the Milky Way from sight, something beautiful slipped quietly out of reach. And yet, the memory remains. That's the paradox of the great forgetting. It never truly erases, it only buries. The knowledge that we once lived in harmony with the stars still stirs beneath our modern world, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear its faint hum again. Some say the forgetting came in waves, a flood that drowned cities, an ice age that erased coastlines, a comet that darkened the skies. Each catastrophe a reset, forcing humanity to begin again with fragments. We carry the stories of these resets in myth, the deluges, the fires, the lost continents of Atlantis and Mu. Whether these are literal histories or metaphors hardly matters. The truth they hold is that civilization is fragile. Knowledge must be tended like flame, or it vanishes. Perhaps there was once a civilization so in tune with the stars that it didn't need writing, its wisdom encoded in architecture, ritual, and oral tradition. When that civilization fell, its songs were scattered, and the people who came after inherited its ruins but not its meaning. Imagine that for a moment. A society that remembered the cycles of precession, that tracked the dance of the planets with its temples, that understood energy not as electricity, but as harmony. Then imagine what it would feel like to awaken one morning and find it all gone. The stars would still be there, but their language would be lost. The people would rebuild, of course they always do, but something essential would be missing. They would tell stories of gods who had once walked among them, of wisdom once freely given and then taken away. They would search the skies not with familiarity but with longing. That ache, the ache of disconnection, might be the truest sign of the great forgetting. Even our own history carries that ache. We marvel at the achievements of the ancients, at the precision of their architecture, the breadth of their myths, and yet we treat them as mysteries, as if the people who came before us could not possibly have known what they clearly did. It is easier, perhaps, to believe they were guided by accident or myth than to admit that we may have inherited a broken chain of memory. We stand atop their knowledge, but do not understand its foundation. It is as though we have found a library filled with books we can no longer read. And still, the clues remain. The pyramid's alignment with Orion, the Mayan calendar's understanding of galactic time, the ancient stone circles that mark solstices with mathematical precision. We can measure them now, explain them scientifically, but in doing so, we often forget to ask why. Why build such vast monuments to track the stars? Why carve knowledge into rock unless you feared it might be lost? Perhaps they built not only to honor the heavens, but to anchor their understanding against the tide of forgetting. Stone endures when memory fades. If that is true, then every ancient monument is an act of hope, a message sent forward through millennia to us. A whisper saying, "Remember how we saw the world. Remember that the sky was once your mirror. The great forgetting may have erased much, but it has never been absolute." Beneath our technology and our noise, the same instincts remain. We still look up when we are lost. We still feel something stir in our chest when we see a shooting star. We still use phrases like "back to the stars," written in the sky, the heavens above. These are linguistic fossils, remnants of an older consciousness. Sometimes I wonder if the Great Forgetting was not a failure at all, but a necessary pause, a kind of cosmic hibernation. Perhaps humanity was never meant to stay in constant remembrance. Maybe forgetting was how we made space for rediscovery. If you remember everything, you cannot learn. The forgetting may have been part of the design, a cycle of awakening and slumber, ensuring that each age must find the stars again for itself. Each rediscovery would come with awe, and awe is the beginning of wisdom. We are living, perhaps, in one of those moments of awakening now. Our telescopes stretch farther than ever. Our satellites circle the Earth like silver constellations. And yet, our fascination with ancient mysteries grows stronger. We dig, we decode, we dream. We build our own myths about what was lost. Maybe that's not regression but renewal, the slow remembering of a truth we once held naturally, that we are not apart from the cosmos but expressions of it. The Great Forgetting, then, is not only a story about loss, it's a story about continuity disguised as absence. The stars have never stopped shining. The Earth has never stopped spinning in rhythm with them. The knowledge is still there, stored in the tilt of the planet, in the timing of the tides, in the bones of old stones. We may have forgotten how to read it, but the script remains unchanged. And every time someone stands beneath a dark sky and feels the quiet pull of wonder, a small part of that script is being remembered. Maybe that's how remembering works, not in grand discoveries, but in small awakenings. One person at a time, looking up, feeling something ancient stir inside them, something that says, I have seen this before. Because you have. We all have. Somewhere deep in our lineage, in the minds of our ancestors who built their lives in rhythm with the stars, we knew this connection. The Great Forgetting may have hidden it for a time, but it has never truly erased it. The stars remember, even when we do not. And when we look up at them with curiosity rather than indifference, when we listen for what they might be saying, the distance between past and present closes. We become, once again, participants in the same vast conversation. So perhaps the Great Forgetting was never an ending, only an interlude, a quiet breath between chapters. The universe, like a storyteller, pausing to let us rest before the next revelation. And when the story resumes, as it always does, we will find ourselves remembering what we thought was lost, that we were never separate, that the stars were always within us, and that every act of looking up is an act of returning home. 12. Hidden star patterns on Earth. There is something deeply mysterious about the way certain places on our planet seem to hum with quiet precision, as if their stones remember a pattern invisible to the casual eye. You can stand on a hill at dawn, watch the horizon slowly burn to gold, and feel that what you see has been arranged not by chance, but by some ancient, deliberate intelligence. It's not just the pyramids or the circles of standing stones, not just the temples aligned with solstices or the shrines built along invisible lines. It is the land itself, shaped in ways that echo the heavens. There are patterns written into mountains, rivers, cities, and ruins that seem to mirror the constellations above them. It's as though Earth has always carried a secret reflection of the sky, a memory carved into its skin. Archaeologists have long noticed that many ancient sites appear to form constellations when viewed from above. The pyramids of Giza mirror Orion's belt, each positioned to match the angle of the stars as they appeared thousands of years ago. The 7 temples of Angkor Wat align with the 7 stars of Draco. Even across oceans, the pattern repeats. The ruins of Teotihuacan in Mexico correspond eerily with celestial geometry, their main avenue running exactly 15.5 degrees east of north, tracing the rising of the Pleiades. To modern minds, these connections might seem coincidental, but the precision is difficult to ignore. It suggests intention. It suggests that our ancestors were not only looking up, but building the heavens into the earth itself. Perhaps this was their way of keeping the two worlds connected. By recreating the stars in stone, they ensured that heaven would always have an anchor here below. To live among those structures was to live within a cosmic diagram, to walk each day through a map of the universe. The temples weren't just for worship. They were instruments of orientation, reminding every person who entered them that their lives unfolded within a grander harmony. Every wall, every pillar, Every line of sight was an act of remembrance, a way of saying, we belong to this pattern. We are part of it. Some believe that even natural landscapes were chosen or shaped to mirror the sky. Mountain ranges that line up with constellations. Rivers that bend like celestial serpents. Islands arranged like scattered star clusters. It's hard to say whether these correlations are accidents of geology or signs of something deeper. But perhaps the distinction doesn't matter. Maybe ancient people didn't draw a line between what was natural and what was sacred. If a mountain happened to rise beneath a bright star, that was meaning enough. The world itself was the temple, and their role was simply to recognize its design. There's an old belief, found in both Eastern and Western traditions, that the Earth has a kind of invisible nervous system, a web of energy lines that connect sacred sites across continents. The Chinese called them dragon lines. The Celts called them ley lines. Modern science dismisses the idea, but even skeptics acknowledge that many ancient structures align perfectly along specific global paths. The same angles, the same distances, repeating across thousands of miles. It's as if those who built them were following a pattern too vast to see from the ground, a map that could only be read from the perspective of the sky. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps they wanted to speak in geometry, in alignments, in proportions that would last long after language itself had shifted. Imagine being one of those builders. The nights would have been endless, your only tools the stars and your patience. You would have marked where certain constellations rose, how their positions shifted through the seasons. You would have felt the connection between those patterns and the tides, the winds, the migrations of animals. And then, one night, you might have realized something extraordinary, that the sky above and the land below were not separate realities, but mirror images, two reflections of the same living system. To build on Earth was to extend the heavens. To raise a stone was to trace the path of a star. Perhaps that's why so many ancient cities seem to hum, with a strange energy, even in ruin. They were designed to resonate. When you stand in the center of an ancient plaza, the proportions feel right, almost musical. The angle of a stairway, the width of a corridor, the height of a doorway, everything flows in rhythm. Those proportions correspond to astronomical ratios, the same mathematical relationships found in planetary orbits and musical harmony. The architects were not just engineers, they were composers, writing symphonies in stone, and the earth was their instrument. If this idea feels mystical, it's only because we have forgotten how to read it. The ancients didn't separate science and spirit. To them, they were one and the same. When they built in alignment with the stars, they were performing an act of devotion through precision. Each calculation was a prayer, each shadow a verse. To live in such a world would be to move through a perpetual ceremony, to wake and sleep in sync with the turning of the cosmos. Life itself was the ritual. Some modern researchers have begun to notice patterns that seem to connect distant civilizations. The distance between certain sacred sites corresponds to planetary ratios or harmonic frequencies. The same geometric shapes, triangles, spirals, hexagons, appear in cultures separated by oceans and millennia. It's as though a single underlying code guided them all, a kind of universal blueprint for harmony. Whether this was coincidence, shared intuition, or the inheritance of a lost science, no one can say for certain. But the result is undeniable. Across the Earth, a map of the stars exists, half buried in our architecture, waiting to be seen. If we think of Earth as a mirror of the heavens, then perhaps these star patterns were not just tributes, they were communication. Maybe those who built them were sending messages back to the sky, not in words, but in structure. To look at the pyramids from above, their arrangement gleaming under moonlight, is to see a signal written in planetary scale. It's humbling to imagine that maybe the Earth itself has been speaking all along, and that we are only now beginning to hear its language again. There is also another possibility, softer and more human. Perhaps the star patterns were not made to be seen from above, but to remind those on the ground of something within themselves. The same stars that shone above also lived inside the same light, the same matter, the same quiet yearning for connection. To align one's city with the heavens was to align one's soul with creation. It was not a gesture of imitation, but of identity. By mapping the stars onto the Earth, they were declaring, "We are part of this pattern. We belong to the same story. Maybe that's why, even now, these places move us. We feel something when we stand among them, not just awe, but recognition. The lines, the proportions, the silent symmetry, they remind us of something we used to know, but can't quite recall. The memory hums faintly beneath the surface of thought, like a tune half remembered from childhood. We call it mystery, but perhaps it's memory trying to return. The hidden star patterns on Earth are not truly hidden. They are everywhere, in every compass point, in every sunrise, in the quiet geometry of living things. The veins of a leaf, the spiral of a shell, the branching of a river, they all follow the same cosmic logic. We are surrounded by the same design that governs the stars. The ancients saw it clearly. They built it into the bones of their world so they would never forget. And though we've covered much of it in asphalt and light, it still breathes beneath our feet, waiting for us to notice. Perhaps that is the invitation these ancient sites extend to look again, to trace the lines between heaven and earth, and to feel that quiet sense of belonging that once guided our ancestors. The constellations above may shift slowly over time, but their echoes remain imprinted in stone and soil. To walk among them is to walk through a map of both space and soul, a reminder that we have always been participants in the same vast design, and that even after millennia of forgetting, the Earth still remembers the pattern of the stars. 13. The memory of water. There are few things on Earth as patient as water. It moves slowly through stone, seeps through soil, rises into clouds, and falls again in endless rhythm. It carries the memory of mountains, forests, and oceans across centuries, whispering to everything it touches. When you listen closely near a river or stand beside a still lake at dusk, it feels as if the water is speaking not in words, but in continuity. The same molecules that once fell on ancient temples now glide across your skin when it rains. The same droplets that cooled the stones of forgotten civilizations now rest beneath the ice of polar caps. Water remembers. It carries the story of the planet, quietly circulating the memory of what once was. If the stars hold the memory of time, water holds the memory of life. Every organism, every civilization has depended upon it, shaped it, and been shaped by it in return. And in that way, water may be the most ancient archive we have. It has seen everything, travelled everywhere, witnessed every rise and fall. Before any myth was spoken or any temple built, water was already here, reflecting the sky and teaching us about motion, renewal, and return. Its surface mirrored the heavens long before humans did, making rivers and oceans the first observatories. When the stars rippled across still water, our ancestors must have felt an almost sacred recognition. Heaven meeting earth, light meeting reflection. Perhaps that was the first time humanity realized that what is above also lives below. Many of the world's oldest civilizations treated water not just as a necessity, but as a medium of memory. The Nile, the Ganges, the Euphrates, the Yangtze. These rivers were more than resources. They were teachers. People built their calendars around their floods, their rituals around their tides. They saw in their cycles the rhythm of life and death, forgetting and renewal. When the Nile rose, it wasn't only an agricultural event, it was a cosmic one. The flood mirrored the rising of Sirius in the sky, connecting celestial timing with earthly abundance. It was as if the river itself was synchronized with the stars, carrying their rhythm through its currents. In myth, water often appears as a bridge between worlds. It divides and connects, conceals and reveals. The Greek Styx separated the living from the dead. The Japanese spoke of rivers that souls crossed before reaching the afterlife. In Norse legend, a vast ocean surrounded all realms, reflecting the eternal cycles of creation and destruction. To pass through water was to move between realities, to cleanse, to forget, to begin again. Perhaps that is because water, in its quiet persistence, embodies the mystery of transformation. It becomes rain, mist, ice, vapor never lost, only changed. To ancient minds, that must have seemed like immortality itself, and maybe, in its own way, it is. Modern science tells us that water has existed on Earth for more than 4 billion years, older than any mountain or continent. Some of it even predates the planet, formed in the cold clouds between stars before the solar system was born. Every drop we drink once drifted through space. When you lift a glass of water, you are holding something that has traveled across galaxies. It is a cosmic relic, a survivor of creation. No wonder it has always been sacred. It's possible that the lost civilizations we've been imagining knew this far more intimately than we do. They built their temples near springs and rivers, not only for convenience but for alignment. The movement of water mirrored the movement of the heavens. A flowing river beneath a starry sky would have been a living diagram, a dance between reflection and reality. Some ancient sites even seem designed to amplify that connection. In certain temples of Egypt and South America, when the water level rose, it created perfect reflections of the stars above, turning the floor into a second sky. In those moments, heaven and earth truly became one, and water was the bridge. If stone was the memory of form, water was the memory of flow. The ancients carved their symbols into rock so they would endure, but they poured their stories into water so they would move. Myths spread along rivers, carried from village to village by traders and travelers. Songs drifted downstream, echoing across generations. The same current that shaped valleys also shaped language, connecting people through sound and motion. Perhaps that's why so many ancient deities were associated with both water and wisdom. Thoth, Saraswati, Enki, Chalchiotlikue. To them, knowledge was not static, it flowed. There's something poetic about that. Maybe wisdom itself behaves like water. It takes the shape of whatever holds it. It can be frozen into structure, evaporate into imagination, condense again in new minds. It never disappears, only transforms. Even when humanity forgets, water remembers. It continues its quiet circulation, carrying traces of what was once known, waiting for us to notice. If we could listen to the memory of water, what would it tell us? Perhaps it would speak of ages before the Great Forgetting, when temples mirrored constellations and people watched the stars through their reflections on calm seas. Perhaps it would whisper about the first ships that sailed guided by the moon, or the cities now buried beneath its depths, their stone streets softened by coral and silt. It would remember the rise and fall of coastlines, the migrations of people following rivers that no longer flow. It would remember songs sung to it, offerings cast into it, prayers whispered over its surface. Every sound ever made near water still echoes, faintly within it. And water listens still. Even today, when we stand near the ocean, we feel that same pull. Our ancestors felt the sense that the horizon holds both distance and memory. The rhythm of waves carries a heartbeat older than life itself. When we watch ripples move across a pond, we are seeing a metaphor for the universe energy spreading outward, touching everything in reach, returning in concentric circles. The laws of physics and the language of myth both describe the same truth. Everything moves, everything connects, nothing is truly lost. There are stories of monks and shamans who claim to learn from rivers that if one sat long enough by running water, the mind would begin to align with its rhythm, and understanding would come naturally. The sound of water erases noise, leaving only presence. Maybe that is why so many sacred rituals involve it. Baptisms, purifications, libations. It is not simply about cleansing the body, but clearing the mind, allowing it to remember what it once knew. In the movement of water, one can feel the same intelligence that moves the stars, steady, cyclical, compassionate. When night falls on a calm lake and the surface becomes a perfect mirror of the sky, the illusion is complete. You stand between two infinities, above and below, both glimmering with light. It's easy to understand why ancient people believed that souls traveled through water to reach the heavens. In that moment, reflection and reality are one. The stars seem to float, both in space and in the depths. You are surrounded by the universe, cradled by it, as though the planet itself remembers what it means to belong. Maybe that's what water has been trying to teach all along, that memory is not about holding still, but about continuing to move. That, to remember, is to flow, to adapt, to keep the pattern alive, even as it changes form. The civilizations that came before us built their understanding of the world upon that truth, and when we forgot it, the water did not. It still carries the rhythm of their prayers, the trace of their touch, the reflection of their stars. So the next time rain falls, or you walk beside a river, imagine that you are not just watching weather or landscape. You are witnessing the planet's memory in motion. You are seeing the same element that has connected every life before you and will connect every life after. You are watching the Earth think. And if you stand still long enough, if you listen to its soft conversation with the wind and the sky, you might feel it, an ancient recognition stirring inside you, as if the water is saying, "I remember you. Do you remember me?" And in that moment, as reflection blurs into reality, you may realize that remembering isn't about looking back at all. It's about flowing forward, carrying the light of what once was into what is yet to come, just as the rivers carry the memory of the stars across the skin of the earth. 14. The language of light. When night falls on an unlit horizon, far from the hum of cities and the artificial brightness of our inventions, there is a silence that feels like communication. You look up, and the stars are not merely dots but sentences, shining fragments of an ancient language written in light. They shimmer, pulse, and move in ways that seem intentional, like the slow breathing of the cosmos itself. For most of human history, this was our first alphabet. The stars taught us how to read, not with letters, but with patterns and meaning woven through time. And though we've built new kinds of light since then, electric, digital, temporary, it is the old light that still speaks most clearly. The universe has always spoken in photons, in brilliance travelling across unimaginable distances to remind us that nothing luminous ever truly disappears. It's difficult to imagine what it must have felt like the first time someone realized that the light of a star might carry meaning. Imagine standing on the edge of the desert, the air cool and thin, and noticing that the same constellation rises in the same part of the sky every year, guiding migrations, floods, and harvests. That light wasn't random, it was reliable. It told stories, it gave structure to time. The ancients learned to listen to light the way we now listen to words. They built calendars from it, myths from it, and temples that could catch it at the right moment, as if light itself were a visitor, passing messages through architecture. Every dawn and equinox was a syllable, every eclipse a sentence, every comet an exclamation mark. The first civilizations must have seen light not as a thing, but as a being, something alive, intelligent, and benevolent. In Egypt, Ra sailed his solar bark across the sky each day, returning to the underworld each night to fight chaos before rising again. In Mesoamerica, the sun was a god reborn daily through sacrifice. The Greeks imagined Helios driving his radiant chariot. Even in far older cultures, light was synonymous with divinity. It represented awareness, creation, and order, the act of seeing and being seen. When light appeared, so did meaning. When it vanished, uncertainty followed. The cycle of illumination and darkness became the rhythm of existence itself. But what if light is more than symbol? What if it truly is the universe's language, a way of communicating across both space and consciousness? Every photon that reaches our eyes began its journey long before we were born. The light from some stars started travelling when the first humans were lighting fires in caves. The photons that strike your retina tonight may have left their source millions of years ago, carrying not just brightness, but history. In a quiet, literal sense, the universe is always talking to us through the language of its light, telling us what has been, revealing what still exists, even when it seems impossibly distant. The ancients seemed to understand this intuitively. They built in ways that allowed light to participate in their rituals. Temples were oriented so that the rising sun would pierce their chambers at precise times, an annual alignment between human intention and cosmic rhythm. The light wasn't decoration, it was meaning incarnate. At Abu Simbel, sunlight travels down a narrow corridor only twice a year to illuminate the statues of gods deep inside. At Newgrange in Ireland, a beam of winter solstice light spills through a passage and touches carvings older than writing. At Chichen Itza, the setting sun casts the shadow of a serpent along the pyramid steps. In these moments, light and stone become collaborators, performing an ancient dialogue that transcends language. We've inherited that dialogue, even if we don't always realize it. Every time we use light to communicate, to write, to photograph, to send signals through fiber optics, we're continuing the same practice our ancestors began. We're shaping illumination into meaning. Even our screens, glowing in the dark, are descendants of those first beams that filtered through temple corridors. The difference is that our light is immediate, fleeting, while theirs travelled through time. They worked with the light of the cosmos. We work with the light we create. Yet deep down, the impulse is the same: to connect, to be understood, to leave something shining in the dark for others to find. There's a strange poetry in how the universe uses light to record itself. Every galaxy, every planet, every movement leaves an imprint in the photons that escape it. Light carries not just position but memory, the trace of what was. When we gaze at distant stars, we are looking into the past, reading messages written before our species existed. And when we send out light of our own, through telescopes, radio waves, or spacecraft, we are adding our voice to that universal conversation. It is humbling to realize that the language we use to study the cosmos is the same one it uses to speak to us. In some ways, light is the perfect metaphor for consciousness itself. It moves endlessly, illuminating everything it touches, but never clinging to any one place. It reveals rather than possesses. It has no weight, yet it carries energy enough to shape worlds. Ancient mystics seemed to know this, long before physics confirmed it. They described enlightenment not as gaining new information, but as becoming transparent, letting awareness flow through without distortion. To be illuminated was not to shine by one's own power, but to reflect the light that was already there. Perhaps they understood that consciousness, like light, is not something separate from the universe, but an expression of it, moving through us the way starlight moves through space. And yet, in our age of electric brightness, we sometimes lose the subtlety of light's language. Surrounded by artificial glow, we forget how to see the stars, how to notice the slow movement of shadows, the pale flicker of dawn through fog. We treat light as a commodity, something to be controlled, switched on and off rather than a teacher. But if we were to sit again beneath a dark sky, our devices dimmed, we might rediscover what the ancients knew: that light is not merely illumination, but relationship. It touches us, speaks to us, and connects us to everything else that has ever shone. There is also the light within the faint, unmeasurable radiance that animates living things. Every heartbeat, every thought is a flicker of energy, a spark of bioelectric rhythm. Some call it spirit, some call it consciousness, some call it the dance of neurons, but whatever its name, it feels ancient, as though we carry a fragment of the stars inside us. After all, we are made of the same elements forged in their cores. To think, to feel, to wonder, these are acts of light taking form. When we gaze upward, we are not simply observing the universe, we are recognizing ourselves within it. Perhaps that is why light has always been the symbol of awakening. When a revelation comes, we say, "I see." When clarity arrives, we say, "It dawned on me." Our language still carries the echoes of that old understanding, that knowledge and light are the same thing. Maybe this isn't just metaphor. Maybe awareness itself is the universe becoming luminous from within, each conscious being a star of perception scattered across space and time. The language of light, then, is not lost, it's ongoing. Every sunrise still speaks it, every reflection on the surface of a river, every flicker of thought in a human mind. It is the universal grammar of existence, written not in words but in wavelengths, understood not by intellect but by awe. The ancients may have listened more closely to it, but it has never stopped speaking. It's there in the warmth on your face when the sun rises, in the silver trail of moonlight across the ocean, in the quiet shimmer of stars that have already died yet still shine. If you stand beneath them tonight, take a moment to let the light settle on your skin. Feel how it has travelled across unimaginable distance and time just to arrive here, just to touch you. In that touch lies connection not only to the stars, but to everyone who has ever looked up at them and wondered. We all speak this language, even when we forget. It is written in the way we seek truth, the way we create, the way we love. The light has always been trying to remind us that nothing luminous ever truly fades. It only changes form, carrying the message forward, illuminating the next heart, the next mind, the next world waiting quietly to remember. 15. When the stars were teachers. There was a time when the stars were not distant things. They were near enough to guide, near enough to teach, near enough to be spoken to in the language of reverence. The night sky was once humanity's first classroom, and its lessons were written not on tablets or in books, but in the slow, unhurried movements of light. Before alphabets, before monuments, before clocks and borders, people learned how to live by watching the stars. Every flicker, every rising and setting, every silence between constellations told a story, and the earth listened. The stars were not mere background to life, they were its rhythm, its teacher, and its mirror. Imagine that first teacher, the quiet dome of night, stretching over a group of early humans gathered around a small fire. Flames dance, shadows sway, and above them the sky unfolds in infinite patience. Somewhere, someone notices that a certain bright point always returns to the same place, that others form shapes that seem to move with the seasons. They connect the dots, not out of whim but out of wonder, and something clicks, an awareness that time has order, that the world above repeats itself with purpose. That realization may have been humanity's first lesson in continuity, the first moment when chaos began to look like pattern. The stars taught us that the universe has a memory. It's easy to forget how dependent we once were on that celestial classroom. The stars gave us direction when there were no maps. They gave us calendars when there were no clocks. They gave us meaning when there were no words large enough to hold it. To navigate by the stars was to trust something greater than oneself, something stable and ancient. Even the earliest travelers, seafarers and nomads learned to orient their lives by those silent lights. The North Star, unblinking and steadfast, became a symbol of constancy. The constellations, drifting like stories across the night, became guides to planting, harvesting, and migration. In this way, the heavens wrote the first curriculum of civilization. But the stars did more than guide our movements, they shaped our thoughts. Their predictability taught us logic, their beauty taught us art, and their vastness taught us humility. The earliest philosophers did not look into books to ask who we are. They looked upward. When they saw the slow wheel of the heavens turning above them, they began to imagine invisible forces at work, a cosmic order, perhaps even intention. From that came the first questions about purpose, fate, and the nature of being. The stars taught us how to wonder. That sense of wonder is older than science, but it also gave birth to it. Astronomy was not separate from philosophy or myth, it was their parent. To watch the heavens night after night was to learn discipline, observation, patience. Patterns became predictions. Predictions became understanding. Slowly, humans realized that by following the lessons of the stars, they could measure the cycles of nature, the coming of rain, the arrival of floods, the return of warmth. Entire cities were built on this knowledge. Every ziggurat, every pyramid, every temple aligned to the sky was a page in the same textbook, the universe, teaching its lessons through shadow and light. In some sense, the ancients may have understood education better than we do. They didn't just learn facts, they learned relationship. To study the stars was not to dominate or exploit, but to align. Knowledge wasn't something to own, it was something to live within. The night sky was a teacher that demanded humility. It reminded humanity that they were part of a larger pattern, that their individual lives were threads in a cosmic tapestry too vast to comprehend fully. To live wisely was to live in rhythm with that pattern. The ancients didn't seek to conquer the heavens, they sought to reflect them. Every culture translated those teachings differently. To the Egyptians, the stars were gods sailing across the night on celestial boats, their movements dictating the sacred order of existence. To the Polynesians, the stars were paths through an ocean without boundaries, each one a teacher in navigation and courage. To the Greeks, the constellations became stories, lessons encoded in myth about pride, love, and transformation. To the Chinese, they were a map of moral harmony, each star corresponding to an emperor, a virtue, a law of balance. The stars were universal. but the lessons they taught were tailored to the needs of each people. Every civilization was, in a sense, a student interpreting the same teacher's language in its own dialect. Sometimes I wonder what it felt like to live with that kind of awareness, to wake each night to a sky alive with meaning. You would know the stars not as strangers but as companions, old, wise presences that kept time with your heart. You might look up before a long journey and feel comforted, knowing they would not abandon you. You might pray not for miracles but for alignment, asking the stars to guide your inner life as they guided your steps. The universe was both vast and intimate, both unknowable and familiar. To live beneath it was to live inside an ongoing lesson, one that required only that you keep looking, keep listening. Over time, though, the lesson changed. The more we understood the mechanics of the cosmos, the more we mistook understanding for mastery. The stars became data points, not deities. The sky became a map, not a mirror. We learned how to predict eclipses, but forgot how to feel awe when they happened. We built telescopes to peer farther than ever before, but in doing so, we distanced ourselves from the experience of wonder. The stars, once our teachers, became subjects of study, brilliant, yes, but silent. We translated their light into numbers and lost their voice. And yet, something of the old teaching remains. Even in an age of satellites and space stations, when we gaze into the night, a strange quiet takes hold. Our breath slows, our thoughts expand. The stars still command attention, still awaken something ancient in us. It is not knowledge they offer now, but remembrance. A reminder that we are small, yes, but not insignificant. That our awareness, fragile and fleeting though it may be, is made of the same substance that burns in them. The stars have been teaching that lesson since the beginning, that the light we see above us is the same light that glows within us. Perhaps that is why, in moments of grief or confusion, people instinctively look up. The stars are constant when everything else shifts. They offer perspective not through words, but through scale. They remind us that time moves slowly, that what feels like chaos now is just a small swirl in a greater order. To learn from the stars is to remember patience, to find stillness within motion. Their lessons are quiet ones: endurance, repetition, beauty through impermanence. In a way, the stars have never stopped teaching. We may have changed our language, replaced myth with mathematics, but the curriculum is the same. We study them not just to understand the universe, but to understand ourselves. The equations we write, the observatories we build, the missions we launch into the dark, all are acts of dialogue, modern prayers cast into the sky. We are still students, still seeking to comprehend what our ancestors felt but could not articulate. Every telescope, every image of a distant galaxy, is a continuation of that first act of wonder around the ancient fire. Someone looking up and realizing that the lights above are speaking, if only we know how to listen. Maybe that's the truest lesson the stars ever taught, that listening is the beginning of all wisdom. Not listening to conquer, but to understand. Not to explain, but to feel the rhythm of existence that hums quietly through everything. The stars taught our ancestors how to listen outward. Perhaps now they're trying to teach us how to listen inward, to the same cosmic harmony that lives inside us. When we do, the separation between earth and sky, between student and teacher, dissolves. The stars no longer look distant. They look like reflections. And we realize, with a kind of gentle certainty, that the first classroom we ever knew is still open, still shining, still waiting for us to look up and remember that we were always meant to learn from the light. 16. The sound of the heavens. If you stand in a quiet enough place, far from cities and wind, somewhere the air hangs still and the earth itself seems to pause, you might begin to sense that the sky isn't silent at all. The stars, though they shimmer wordlessly, seem to hum. The planets, though invisible to the ear, seem to vibrate with their own low song. Ancient people often spoke of this, the music of the spheres, the harmony of the cosmos. They believed that the universe was not only made of matter and light, but also of sound, subtle and eternal, a vibration that underlies everything that exists. And though we can no longer hear it in the way they imagined, science has since confirmed what the mystics knew. The cosmos does have a rhythm, a resonance, a quiet pulse that carries across the emptiness of space. The ancients did not think of sound as we do. To them, it wasn't simply noise or vibration, it was structure, order, the invisible framework upon which reality was built. Every temple, every stone circle, every string of a lyre was thought to echo the same pattern that moved the heavens. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras believed that each planet emitted a tone based on its orbit, and that together they created a celestial harmony, a grand, inaudible symphony in which every being had its note. To live well was to be in tune with that music. To live poorly was to fall out of harmony. The Egyptians spoke of the world being sung into existence by divine breath. In Hindu cosmology, the universe began with a single syllable, Om, the vibration that set everything in motion. Across cultures and centuries, the same truth whispered through myth and ritual. Before there was light, there was sound. Modern science, curiously, agrees. In the beginning, before stars and galaxies, the early universe was filled with sound waves rippling through the dense plasma of creation. Astronomers can still detect those ancient vibrations in the cosmic background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang. They are the faintest possible echoes, a memory of the universe's first breath. In that sense, sound is not just metaphor, it is history. The entire cosmos is a recording of its own origin, humming softly through time. And when you listen, truly listen to the night, you might almost hear it, the great, slow chord that everything belongs to. Perhaps that is why humans have always sought music. We are, in a way, made of it. The rhythm of our hearts mirrors the rhythm of orbits. Our breathing follows the tides. When we sing, when we drum, when we hum softly to ourselves in the dark, we are participating in the same pattern that moves the stars. Sound is one of the oldest bridges between heaven and earth. It vibrates through air and water, through bone and memory, reminding us that nothing in the universe is still. Even silence, when you listen long enough, reveals its texture, a soft vibration at the edge of perception, the sound of existence itself. In ancient temples and caves, the builders seemed to understand this. Many sacred sites are not only aligned with stars, but also tuned acoustically. The chambers of the Great Pyramid resonate at specific frequencies. The stone circles of Britain amplify certain tones. Even the prehistoric caves of France and Spain, where early humans painted animals on the walls, have been found to possess unique echoes. Some scholars believe those echoes were part of ritual, the sound of the human voice joining the sound of the earth, an offering made through resonance. The walls, the air, and the people became one instrument. In that union of voice and stone, perhaps they were trying to reproduce the music of the heavens on earth. Sound carries memory in a way few other things can. Long after words fade, their vibrations linger in the air, in the objects that received them. Every temple chant, every drum beat, every whispered prayer becomes part of the fabric of its surroundings. There are monasteries built centuries ago where the stones still seem to hum faintly, as if the prayers never stopped. The air remembers. The earth remembers. Sound is the invisible script of existence, always being written, always being erased, and always beginning again. It's fascinating to think that the universe communicates through vibration still. The light from stars flickers with frequencies. The solar wind sings as it passes magnetic fields. The planets themselves emit radio tones when converted into sound. NASA has recorded these cosmic songs, Jupiter's eerie pulses, Saturn's haunting auroras, the sun's deep, droning heartbeat. They are not songs in the human sense, but they feel alive, as though the universe were whispering its secrets in frequencies we can almost recognize. Perhaps that's why music touches something so deep in us it is not merely entertainment, but recognition. When we hear harmony, we are remembering the structure we were born from. There's an old saying that the world is sustained by sound, that if the cosmic music were ever to stop, everything would collapse into stillness. Whether or not that's literally true, there is a kind of wisdom in it. Sound, like life, is movement. It requires vibration, and vibration requires energy. In every note, there is motion, and in every motion, there is creation. When we speak, sing, or listen, we are contributing to the ongoing composition of existence. The stars hum, the earth resonates, the oceans murmur, and between them all, a great harmony persists. We are both listeners and participants in that grand orchestra. Somewhere deep in the human past, there must have been people who understood this not as theory but as truth. They would have used sound to heal, to align, to connect. Their instruments, drums, flutes, shells, were not just for melody but for balance. The rhythm of ritual drumming matched the rhythm of the heart, syncing human emotion to the pulse of the world. The chant, repeated softly in the dark, was not simply prayer but calibration, a tuning of the soul to the universe's frequency. When those people gathered under the night sky and sang, they were not performing for gods, they were resonating with the cosmos itself. Even now, if you hum quietly to yourself beneath the stars, something stirs in response. It's subtle, but you can feel it, a shift in the air, a soft alignment. It's as if the vibrations of your own voice find their reflection in the unseen vibrations of the world around you. For a brief moment, you are in harmony with everything. That may be what the ancients meant when they spoke of divine sound. Not a literal noise, but a state of attunement, a merging of inner and outer frequencies until the boundary dissolves. In that state, the universe doesn't feel distant. It feels near, like a living presence that breathes through every atom. The wind becomes a melody, the rustle of leaves a harmony, the heartbeat a drum. The cosmos, once thought to be silent, reveals itself as endlessly musical. To live in awareness of that music is to live with a kind of grace, to move not against the world's rhythm, but with it. The stars, after all, do not rush. Their music is patient, unfolding across millions of years, and yet it reaches us still. Perhaps that's the final lesson the sound of the heavens offers, that harmony isn't perfection, but participation. To be alive is to vibrate, to resonate, to contribute one's own tone to the great song of existence. When we laugh, when we whisper, when we breathe, we are part of that song. The universe does not ask for silence, it asks for harmony. And somewhere, far beyond our hearing, the stars continue their slow, eternal music, waiting for us to remember that we were always part of their choir. 17. The architects of alignment. Somewhere in the deep corridors of time, long before writing etched language into stone, there were people who watched the sky with patience greater than our own. They noticed how shadows shortened and lengthened with the seasons, how the stars drifted ever so slightly from their nightly paths, how certain constellations rose precisely where the sun did at the year's turning. They were the first architects of alignment builders who shaped the earth according to the heavens. They saw geometry not as invention but as discovery, a pattern already written into the world. And though we do not know their names, their work still stands, silent and enduring, aligned perfectly with the celestial clock. It's humbling to think about how they learned this without instruments, without the mathematics we rely on today. Their tools were their eyes, their memory, their devotion. Night after night, generation after generation, they traced the stars and marked their movement with stones. Each pillar, each corridor, each mound they built was a record of an observation, a translation of the sky into form. They understood something we've mostly forgotten, that the universe is not random, but rhythmic, that everything that moves in the heavens has a counterpart in the earth below. To align a temple with a star was not only an act of engineering, it was an act of participation, a way of joining the cosmic design. In nearly every ancient culture, alignment was sacred. The Great Pyramid of Giza faces true north with a precision that modern compasses can barely match. At Stonehenge, the midsummer sun rises perfectly through the heel stone, its rays spilling into the circle like a slow exhalation of light. In the Americas, the Mayan pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza casts the shadow of a serpent on the equinox, its stone body descending the stairs as the sun moves across the sky. Across the world, and across millennia, the same principle guided human hands, the desire to harmonize the built world with the celestial one. To modernize, such precision might seem like ritual or superstition, but it was also knowledge, an understanding that the universe was measurable, that time could be read through the dialogue between light and matter. These builders were scientists, artists, and mystics all at once. They did not separate those roles because to them, truth was unified. Their architecture was a form of language, a geometry of reverence. Each structure spoke to both heaven and earth, reminding all who entered that they lived in a world ordered by beauty. There's a quiet poetry in imagining how they worked. Picture them at dawn, standing on the bare ground, watching for the exact point where the first beam of sunlight crests the horizon. They place a marker, a stone, perhaps, and then return the next day, and the next, until they are certain of the sun's path. They note where the stars rise, how their positions shift with the turning of the year. Slowly, a plan takes shape. They draw the universe downward, transforming the sky's curve into lines and angles. The foundation of their temple becomes a reflection of the cosmos above. In every direction, something celestial is mirrored: north to Polaris, east to the equinox, west to the setting sun. What they build is not merely structure but synthesis, the joining of two worlds into one. Some say they built these alignments for gods, but perhaps the gods were only symbols for something larger, the order itself, the unbroken harmony of existence. To live in alignment was to live truthfully, to honor the balance between what is seen and unseen. When the sunlight entered a temple corridor at precisely the right moment of the year, it wasn't just a spectacle, it was reassurance. It proved that the world still turned as it should, that the heavens still watched over the earth, that chaos had not won. Their architecture was a heartbeat, synchronized with the pulse of the cosmos. Over time, these alignments became part of life's rhythm. Farmers watched them to know when to plant. Priests read them as calendars of divine cycles. Travelers followed them as guides. But beneath all those practical uses was something subtler, more profound, a sense of belonging. To live in a city or village aligned with the stars was to feel connected not only to the earth beneath your feet, but to the vastness above your head. The same forces that governed the planets governed your days. You were not separate from the universe. You were a note within its composition. It's easy to romanticize this, but perhaps the greatest lesson of those ancient builders is not nostalgia, it's remembrance. They remind us that architecture once meant more than shelter. It was philosophy carved into stone. The builders saw in every horizon a question: how does this place fit into the grand design? And in answering, they left behind maps not of territory, but of awareness. Their temples, pyramids, and observatories were physical meditations, their alignments and invitations to remember the relationship between matter and meaning. Even now, when we rediscover these alignments with lasers and satellites, something stirs in us. We recognize the intention behind them, the intelligence of their precision, the humility of their devotion. We feel a kind of kinship across time, as if we, too, are remembering what they once knew. That alignment is not just about direction, but about connection. The builders who stood beneath the dawn, all those millennia ago, were not only aligning their structures, they were aligning themselves. Perhaps that is the deeper significance of their work. To live in alignment is to move with purpose, to recognize one's place in the unfolding pattern. The earth spins, the stars drift, the seasons change, yet within that motion there is order. The ancient architects built that truth into everything they made, as if to say, remember that you, too, are part of this pattern. Your actions, your thoughts, your life, they can all align with something larger if you are willing to look up and listen. There is a quiet humility in that idea, one that feels needed now more than ever. We have built cities that glow so brightly they drown out the stars, towers that stretch toward the heavens, yet forget their origins in the soil. But perhaps the lesson of the ancient builders is not lost, it is only waiting to be relearned. We can still build in alignment, not necessarily with stone and shadow, but with awareness, with choices that reflect balance, compassion, and continuity. We can still design our lives to echo the harmony of the cosmos. When you stand at one of those ancient sites, the air heavy with stillness, the stones warm with centuries of sunlight, you can feel that alignment humming faintly, like a note still resonating after its sound has faded. The light still falls as it once did. The stars still rise in their appointed places. Time moves, but the pattern endures. The architects of alignment may be long gone, but their design remains alive, teaching us wordlessly through the geometry of dawn. And maybe that is their greatest legacy. Not the monuments themselves, but the reminder that we are all builders, shaping our lives according to the constellations of our choices. The stars have not changed. The rhythm of the earth is the same. All that remains is whether we choose to live in harmony with it. For every sunrise, every solstice, every moment of alignment is still an invitation, a gentle voice from the cosmos saying, remember the pattern, remember the balance. Build your life in tune with the light. 18. The return of the pattern. There are moments, often in the quietest hours of the night, when it feels as though something old is waking. You might sense it in the stillness between thoughts, or in the way the wind moves through trees as if carrying a message it has whispered 1,000 times before. It's not something new, it's something remembered, something ancient returning in fragments. Perhaps this is what happens every few ages. The pattern begins to re-emerge. The same rhythm that guided the stars, shaped the temples, and tuned the hearts of those who came before, begins to hum again beneath the noise of the modern world. The pattern has never vanished. It only waits for the moment when humanity becomes quiet enough to hear it again. If you stand beneath the night sky and simply let your eyes adjust, you start to see it. The stars do not move chaotically. They turn with grace, each orbit part of a greater geometry. The galaxies spiral, the planets dance in ellipses, the tides move in harmony with the moon. Even in chaos, there is rhythm. Even in randomness, repetition. The universe, for all its vastness, appears to know itself through pattern, and everything within it, light, sound, life, echoes that design. It's in the way a shell spirals, in the veins of a leaf, in the rhythm of the human heart. Somewhere deep inside us, we remember that we, too, were made according to that pattern. The ancients saw it clearly. They carved it into stone, painted it on cave walls, and arranged their cities in its image. But over time, the pattern faded from human consciousness, buried beneath invention and progress. We began to see the world as machinery rather than music, as a collection of parts rather than a living whole. And yet, even as we forgot, the pattern endured, woven into the structure of reality itself. It cannot be lost because it is what everything is made from. It can only be ignored. Now, in our age of rediscovery, it feels as if the pattern is reasserting itself, not through temples or monuments, but through awareness. Science begins to glimpse it in the equations of physics, in the fractal structures of nature, in the geometry of galaxies and neurons alike. What once was myth has become mathematics. The spiral that shaped ancient carvings turns out to be the same ratio that guides hurricanes and galaxies. The rhythm that once dictated ritual chants appears in the oscillations of atoms. It's as though the universe is slowly teaching us its language again, one we used to know instinctively. There is a quiet beauty in this convergence between ancient intuition and modern discovery. The astronomer and the mystic, though they use different tools, are beginning to describe the same truth. That everything is connected, and that connection follows a pattern older than time. What one culture called divine order, another calls physics. What one described as sacred geometry, another calls symmetry. The names change, but the essence remains the same, invisible design pulsing through all things. If the pattern is returning, it's not in spectacle but in subtlety. It shows itself in how more people seek stillness, how we long to reconnect with the natural world, how we sense that our pace has drifted out of tune with the rhythm of life. Even technology, for all its noise, is beginning to mirror it. Our networks, our data, our digital constellations, they map the invisible lines of connection that have always existed. Perhaps this is not regression or hubris, but evolution, the pattern expressing itself through new mediums, reminding us that creation is ongoing. You can feel it most strongly in nature, in places untouched by human interference. Walk into a forest at dawn, and you'll see it in the light that filters through branches, each beam diffusing in perfect proportion. Listen to the ocean, and you'll hear it in the rhythm of waves, no two the same, yet all belonging to the same pulse. Even the wind has cadence, whispering through the grass like a language half remembered. It's as if the earth itself hums in tune with the cosmos, a slow heartbeat that everything alive can sense, even if unconsciously. The pattern is not above us or outside us, it moves through us, shaping our thoughts, our breath, our dreams. Sometimes it seems that art and music are how we remember it best. A composer, without knowing why, writes a melody that mirrors planetary motion. A painter arranges colour in the same proportion as a sunset. A poet describes the rhythm of the heart and unknowingly echoes the rhythm of the tides. The creative act has always been a form of remembering. In making beauty, we align ourselves with the order that exists beyond reason. We become participants again, rather than observers. But the return of the pattern is not only about beauty, it is also about balance. When we forget the pattern, we create systems that move against it, machines that consume without pause, economies that grow without rest, minds that never silence themselves. The result is noise, dissonance, exhaustion. The planet responds as any organism would. When out of rhythm, it seeks correction. Storms, fires, migrations, upheavals, these too are ways the pattern restores itself. It cannot be broken, only ignored, and it always finds its way back to harmony. Humanity's task is not to dominate that process, but to recognize it, to move with it instead of against it. There's an image that returns often in old mythologies, the spiral. It appears in ancient carvings, in shells, in galaxies, even in our DNA. The spiral is the shape of return, not a circle that repeats exactly, but a path that curves back while still moving forward. It is memory in motion. The return of the pattern may work the same way. We are not going backward to an ancient age of starlight and stone. We are circling forward, rediscovering what the ancients knew, but expressing it in new forms. Our understanding grows wider each time the pattern completes its turn. Sometimes, I imagine the universe as a vast, slow conversation, an endless exchange between stars and worlds, between matter and meaning. The pattern is the grammar of that conversation, and every age learns to speak it differently. The builders of old spoke it in stone, the seers spoke it in song, we speak it in equations and light, but the message is always the same: connection, rhythm, belonging. The stars are not far away, they are the pattern expressed at a grander scale. When we look at them, we are not gazing outward but inward, toward the memory that built both them and us. It's possible that the pattern never left at all, that it was always whispering through everything we touched and made. Perhaps the return is not its movement, but ours, the slow awakening of attention after a long sleep. The pattern has been patient. It has waited while we built our towers, while we drowned the stars in city light, while we forgot the rhythm of dawn and dusk. But now, as the world grows restless, many are beginning to listen again. You can see it in the way people seek silence, in the way they turn toward the natural world, in the way even our sciences begin to sound like poetry again. The pattern doesn't demand belief. It only asks awareness. It reveals itself through calm, through curiosity, through the willingness to see harmony where we once saw separation. It doesn't punish, it reminds. Every sunrise, every tide, every breath is part of its language. The return of the pattern isn't an event to witness, it's a state of being to rediscover. And perhaps that's the great truth our ancestors tried to leave for us in stone and myth, that we do not need to search for the pattern, only to remember that we are already inside it. The same geometry that shapes galaxies shapes our hearts. The same rhythm that moves the stars moves the pulse beneath our skin. When we remember that, when we live as though it were true, the world feels less like a puzzle and more like a song. And in that moment, brief, fragile, perfect, we find ourselves humming along with it, rejoining the harmony that never really ended. 19. When the sky remembered us. There are nights when the sky seems more alive than usual. The stars shimmer as if aware. The air carries a faint hum that feels almost like recognition. You stand beneath that infinite canopy and, for a moment, sense that the universe is not indifferent at all that it sees you. It's a feeling as old as time itself, a momentary dissolving of the boundary between observer and observed. In that quiet exchange of light and awareness, something ancient stirs. It feels as if the sky itself remembers us, as though it has never truly forgotten the beings who once spoke to it in patterns of stone, song, and firelight. Long before we called ourselves modern, long before the electric glow of our cities drowned out the stars, people believed that the heavens watched them. The constellations were not distant decorations, they were relationships. The sky was a mirror in which humanity saw its reflection not as separate from the cosmos, but as part of its unfolding story. The rising of a star wasn't random, it was a sign. The movement of planets wasn't mechanical, it was alive with intention, and within that web of celestial motion, every person felt included. To look up was to be seen in return. Perhaps that's why ancient cultures spoke of the sky as a being, a mind, an eye, a presence. The Egyptians called it Nut, a vast goddess arching over the earth, swallowing the sun each night and birthing it each dawn. The Ori imagined Ranjanui, the Sky Father, embracing Papat, Nuku, the Earth Mother, in an endless act of creation. In countless myths, the heavens were not an object to study but a partner in dialogue. The stars were the language through which the universe spoke to its children, each constellation a word, each movement a sentence. To live well was to listen. Somewhere along the way, we forgot how to listen. Our lights grew brighter than the stars, our noise louder than the wind. We stopped reading the sky and began to measure it instead. We learned to calculate distances and temperatures, to map constellations with precision, to predict eclipses with flawless accuracy. Yet the more we measured, the less we seemed to feel the connection our ancestors once took for granted. The sky became a picture, not a presence. We could name its parts but not its meaning. It's as though in understanding the mechanism, we misplaced the memory. And yet, memory has a way of returning when the world grows still. There are moments rare but real when that old connection resurfaces. It might happen far from the city, where the stars come out by the thousands and their light feels close enough to touch. Or it might happen in a moment of silence, when a shooting star cuts across the sky and something within you responds instinctively, as if being called by name. These moments remind us that the relationship between humanity and the cosmos was never broken, only obscured. The sky remembers us because, in some deep way, we are part of its memory. Light, after all, is a kind of record. Every photon that reaches Earth carries with it the story of its origin. A sun, a star, a nebula far away. When that light touches your eyes, you are literally receiving messages that began their journey long before humans existed. To see the night sky is to be bathed in ancient memory. The photons falling on your skin tonight may have left their source millions of years ago, long before the first civilizations built their altars to the heavens. You are, in that moment, illuminated by history, by memory made visible. And perhaps that's what recognition feels like, the sky, through its light, reminding us that we are woven into its long and endless story. There is something profoundly comforting in that idea. It means that even as our cities glow and our telescopes stretch farther into the void, the sky still carries the imprint of our gaze. The ancients looked up and mapped their stories among the stars, and those stories still exist, preserved in names and constellations. Orion, the hunter, Ursa, the bear, Cassiopeia, the queen, they are more than patterns of light. They are echoes of human imagination. The sky remembers us because we wrote ourselves into it. Each constellation is a memory, each myth a mark of where we once stood and wondered. Some scientists now speak of the universe as a kind of consciousness, an interconnected field in which every particle affects every other. The idea might sound modern, but it is ancient in spirit. The notion that the cosmos is aware that it listens, that it reflects, has always been part of humanity's quiet intuition. If consciousness arises naturally from complexity, then how could the vast, intricate web of stars not be aware in some way? Maybe when we look up, we are not just observing the universe, but participating in its awareness. Maybe the act of seeing is mutual. In that sense, the relationship between earth and sky is not one of observer and object, but of remembering and being remembered. The stars have seen every dawn, every civilization, every gesture of love and loss beneath their light. They carry the story of us in silence. When you think of all the generations that have looked up at the same constellations, whispered the same questions, felt the same wonder, it becomes clear that the night sky is a collective memory, an eternal witness to what it means to be alive. We may forget the stars for a time, but they never forget us. There is a quiet miracle in that continuity. When a child looks up at Orion tonight, they are connecting not only to distant suns but to ancestors who once did the same. The same light that touched their eyes touches ours. The same wonder that stirred their hearts stirs ours. The sky holds all those moments together, layering them like translucent sheets of time until the past and present overlap. It doesn't matter how many centuries pass or how much we change, the sky keeps the memory intact. Sometimes I imagine that one day, far in the future, when humanity has left the earth behind and travels among the stars, the sky will recognize us wherever we go. It will remember the shape of our planet, the rhythm of our seasons, the songs we sang to the moon. It will greet us not as strangers, but as returning kin. The stars will whisper, "We knew you when you were young." Because in the grand expanse of time, we are still the children of this sky, still learning to listen, still learning to remember. The return of that remembrance might not come with revelation or spectacle. It may come softly, through moments of silence, through dreams, through a single night spent far from artificial light. The stars will begin to speak again, not in words, but in presence. They will remind us that we are not merely living under the sky, but within it, that every breath we take is part of the same exchange that fuels suns and galaxies. We are the sky remembering itself through human form. When you next find yourself awake at midnight, step outside and look up. Let the noise of thought fall away. Watch how the constellations trace slow arcs across the dark. Notice how your breath begins to match the rhythm of that movement. That's not coincidence, it's resonance. The same pattern that guides the heavens beats in your chest. You are part of the memory the universe has kept of itself. The stars remember you not because they are sentimental, but because they are connected, and through them, you remember too. The sky, patient and ancient, has been waiting for this reconnection all along. It needs nothing from us, only that we look up again. When we do, the distance between heaven and earth dissolves. The silence between stars fills with quiet recognition. And for a heartbeat, as brief and eternal as starlight, you can almost hear it, the universe, remembering your name. 20. The last light. There comes a moment, often just before dawn, when the stars begin to fade, not because they have disappeared, but because the world around you is preparing to change its light. The horizon grows pale, the black of night softens to indigo, and the silence that has held the world for hours begins to loosen. It is a moment of transition, when two forms of illumination, starlight and sunlight, share the same sky for an instant. If you've ever been awake to witness it, you know how fragile it feels. The night seems to linger, reluctant to leave, and the coming day feels like a breath held in the chest of the earth. This in-between space, this slow blending of lights, is perhaps the truest reflection of life itself, always moving between remembering and becoming, between the infinite and the immediate. As the stars dim, it feels almost as though they are passing something on a torch of awareness, a reminder that their light never truly leaves. They hand the world back to the sun, which is, after all, just another star, our closest and most constant one. The great cosmic dance continues. The stars yield to morning, and morning yields back to them at night. This rhythm, this exchange, has been happening for billions of years, and yet it never loses its tenderness. Even the oldest light in the universe seems to understand something deeply human, the need to keep returning, to keep illuminating what would otherwise be forgotten. Perhaps that's what this story has always been about. Light remembering itself. From the first spark that ignited the stars, to the first fire kindled by early hands, to the glow of thought within the human mind, each has been a continuation of that same act. Creation has never truly been a beginning. It has been a remembering. The universe has always known how to shine. We simply learn to see it, to shape it, and to tell its story back to itself. In that sense, every civilization, every dream, every act of love has been a small reflection of the first light. When we speak of the last light, it's tempting to think of endings, the fading of stars, the cooling of suns, the long silence that cosmologists say awaits the far future. But the last light is not destruction, it is preservation. It is what remains when everything else falls away. The last light is memory made radiant, the quiet glow that endures even when the source is gone. You can see it in the afterimage left on your eyes when you look at a candle too long, or in the twilight that lingers after the sun has dipped below the horizon. The universe itself carries such afterimages, light still travelling from stars that have long since burned out. The cosmos, it seems, refuses to forget. And maybe that is what we are, two fragments of the last light, still moving through space and time, carrying the story of where we came from. Every atom in our bodies was once part of a star. Every breath we take is threaded with the remnants of their brilliance. We are walking evidence that light does not die. It transforms. When the stars shed themselves, they become everything: planets, oceans, trees, people, thought. The last light lives on not in the sky, but within us. It looks out through our eyes, thinks through our minds, loves through our hearts. When we wonder at the night, it is the universe recognizing itself again. There is a kind of peace in realizing that the light will outlast us. Long after our voices fade, our creations crumble, and our time becomes another layer of sediment in the history of Earth, the light will continue its journey. It will drift through space, carrying our stories encoded in its wavelengths. Perhaps one day it will reach another world, and someone or something will see it, will feel its warmth, and will know that somewhere, long ago, we existed. In that moment, we will be remembered by the cosmos, the way we now remember ancient stars. The last light ensures that nothing luminous is ever truly lost. The ancients seemed to know this intuitively. Their myths were filled with stories of rebirth through fire, of heroes ascending into the sky to become constellations, of divine sparks hidden within mortal forms. They were all metaphors for the same truth, that light, once created, cannot be destroyed, only changed. When they lit torches in their temples, they were not simply honouring the sun or the stars, they were participating in their endurance. To hold fire was to hold the memory of the universe in one's hands. We have our own fires now, electric, digital, artificial, but they all stem from that same impulse, to keep the darkness at bay, to continue the conversation with the stars. Every lamp, every screen, every quiet glow in a window at night is a descendant of the first flames and the first suns. The forms have changed, but the intention has not. We are still creatures of light, still reaching for connection, still shaping brightness out of shadow. Even in our most complex technology, there is something ancient, a spark of that same cosmic remembering. Sometimes I wonder what the last light of Kars, humanity, will look like. Perhaps it won't be a monument or a signal sent into deep space. Perhaps it will be something quieter, a single person standing beneath the stars, remembering that they too are made of the same glow. Or maybe it will be a thought, an act of kindness, a moment of awe. Light is not always brilliance. Sometimes it is gentleness, reflection, understanding. The last light may not shine in the sky at all. It may shine in the stillness of a heart that finally feels at home in the universe. Because to remember the stars is to remember ourselves. Everything we have explored, the myths, the alignments, the songs, the civilizations, has led back to that single recognition. We are not visitors in this cosmos. We are its expression. We are how it dreams, how it reflects upon its own existence. When we wonder about the stars, we are the universe wondering about itself. When we reach for the unknown, we are the cosmos reaching back inward. And when we die, when our energy returns to the great cycle, we do not vanish, we disperse, becoming again the light that fills the dark. It's easy to think of darkness as the opposite of light, but the two are not enemies. They are companions, partners in creation. Without the dark, there could be no contrast, no space for illumination to exist. The stars need the night to be seen. The mind needs stillness to think. The soul needs silence to hear itself. The last light, then, is not the banishment of darkness, but its embrace. It is the point where both become one, where the infinite and the finite dissolve into the same luminous whole. As the first rays of morning stretch across the land, you can almost feel that unity. The stars fade from sight, but their presence lingers in the blue of the dawn. The light of the sun, the same that once flared from the birth of galaxies, warms your skin. You close your eyes and sense the rhythm of it, the same pulse that moves through everything that has ever lived. The sky is brighter now, but the stars have not gone. They've only changed form, absorbed into the daylight, hidden but alive. That is what remembering truly is. Not holding on, but recognizing that nothing is ever lost. And so, as the day begins, you stand in that quiet golden hour and understand what the ancients must have known, that the stars never stop teaching. They teach through their presence and through their silence. They remind us that all things are cycles of light, beginning, fading, returning, always moving toward illumination. The story ends not in darkness, but in continuity. The last light is not a farewell. It is the whisper of the universe, promising that it will remember itself through us, and that we too will continue to live through it. Because somewhere out there, light from this very moment is already leaving Earth, racing outward through the endless dark, carrying with it the memory of who we are. It will travel for ages, long after our names have vanished, long after our world has turned to myth. But still, it will shine. And in that endless, gentle shining lies the truth that has always been waiting for us to remember. The stars were never far away. They were always within us, and their light was never meant to end.